Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was sitting on my back porch, beer in hand, watching the storm roll in. It was one of those humid July evenings in Springfield where the air sticks to your skin and the sky turns a heavy, bruised purple before a storm. The clouds were moving fast, rolling over each other like dark waves, and the thunder was close enough that it rattled the window frames. I'd always liked watching storms. It's calming in a weird way. But that night, something felt off almost immediately. Lightning started flashing across the sky, the usual jagged bolts slicing through the darkness, followed by the low rumble of thunder. I was leaning back in the old plastic chair on the porch watching the show when one bolt caught my attention. It didn't look like the others. It was thinner, sharper, like someone had drawn a white pencil straight from the cloud to the horizon. And it didn't fade. It just stayed there. At first I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks, or maybe I just stared at the wrong spot too long. I blinked, shook my head, but it was still there. A perfect vertical line of bright white hanging in the cloud cover. Not flickering, not branching, just solid. My first thought was that it was some weird atmospheric thing, something meteorologists might have a name for. But the line wasn't static. It bent slightly, just a tiny curve, like it had a mind of its own. And then it shot horizontally across the sky, disappearing behind another layer of clouds. It moved too cleanly, too deliberately to be a lightning strike. I leaned forward, squinting. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, and the rain started spitting against the porch roof. The storm was moving fast, and every time another flash lit the sky, I half expected the line to reappear somewhere else. It didn't. But then I noticed something else. Small, irregular flashes at odd angles, not consistent with the storm's usual pattern. They were faint, almost like reflections, like something metallic was moving up there. I went inside and grabbed my phone, hoping to get a picture. I was careful, standing in the doorway so the rain didn't get me. By the time I had the camera up, the storm had thickened, and I couldn't see anything clearly through the sheets of rain. But I kept noticing the same feeling I get when I know someone's watching me, even though I was alone. It was a heavy, almost physical sensation, like the air had weight. I stepped back inside. The storm was louder now, wind whipping against the house. I sat by the window, watching the sheets of rain, waiting for whatever it was to show itself again. I tried to focus on the other lightning, the regular flashes, the rolling thunder. Then I saw it again. Not the line, but a shape moving through the clouds. It wasn't obvious at first, just a faint silhouette, darker than the surrounding clouds, gliding horizontally across the sky. It didn't make a sound, didn't branch lightning or anything, just moved. I realized I hadn't heard a clap of thunder for that one. The storm was loud enough that silence like that would have been noticeable. It moved against the direction of the clouds, and then it vanished behind the heavier storm cover. I rubbed my eyes, told myself I was imagining things. By this point, I was pacing around the living room. The storm sounded normal again, though I kept glancing outside, half expecting to see that line or the silhouette return. The air smelled wet and metallic, the way it does right before lightning strikes, but there was no strike. Just that lingering tension, like the storm had been holding back something. I tried to get back to normal, poured another beer, but I couldn't shake it. Every time I turned back to the window, I noticed tiny things that didn't make sense. A flash of white in the corner of the clouds that wasn't lightning. A perfectly straight streak that seemed to pause midair. Shadows where none should have been. I kept telling myself it was the storm, that I was just on edge, but nothing explained the way it felt, the way it seemed to respond to me looking at it. I finally decided to go outside to see better. Rain was falling steadily now, soaking the porch and my shirt in seconds. I stood there, craning my neck toward the darkest part of the sky, waiting. That's when the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, just different, thicker. And then I noticed a new pattern in the lightning. Subtle but deliberate, quick flashes in places that weren't part of the normal storm, almost like signals. I stepped back, startled by a crack of thunder too close for comfort, and that's when I saw it. The line again. Thin, white, vertical, slicing through the black clouds. My instinct was to look away, but I couldn't. It bent slightly, the same curve as before, and then zipped away horizontally faster than anything I'd ever seen. No thunder, no follow-up flash, just gone. I blinked, and for a second I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. I ran inside, locked the door, sat down on the couch, trying to calm myself. The storm started to lose intensity, the lightning going back to normal, rolling and branching like it should. I kept checking outside, but everything looked ordinary now. Just clouds, rain, and streetlights glowing through the downpour. My phone said it had been maybe 15 minutes since I first saw the line, but it felt like hours. I kept thinking I should call someone, tell someone, but what would I say? Hey, I saw a lightning bolt that bent and flew horizontally? I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. But the feeling, the weight in the air, the way the storm seemed alive in a way it shouldn't be, stayed with me long after the rain stopped. By the time I went to bed, the sky was clearing, stars just starting to peek through. Everything looked normal. I checked the clouds one last time before shutting the blinds, and for a moment I thought I saw a faint streak against the stars, a thin white line moving too cleanly, too fast to be natural. Then it was gone. I've told a few friends casually over beers or texts, and they laugh it off, say I was tired or imagining things. Maybe I was, but every time a storm comes through Springfield now, I can't just watch it like I used to. I notice the way the clouds move, the patterns of lightning, and I wait, half expecting that line to appear again. And sometimes I swear I see it, just for a moment, slicing through the sky like it doesn't belong. I still can't explain it. I don't know what it was. But I know I saw it, and it wasn't part of any storm I've ever seen before. I was running the 1145 freight out of Fargo that night. It had been a cold January evening, the kind that makes your breath turn instantly to smoke and leaves a crust of frost over the engine's controls. I had the cab to myself, which isn't unusual at that hour, and the train was mostly empty aside from the usual cargo cars. The snow was coming down lightly, just enough to make everything quiet outside, and the tracks glistened under the dim glare of the headlamp. I had been scanning the dark horizon for the next signal when something caught my eye. Up ahead, maybe a mile or so from where I was, there was a shape hovering just above the tracks. I froze at first, thinking it had to be some sort of maintenance crane or a drone, but it didn't move. It didn't have any lights, and it wasn't tethered to anything. It was large, dark, and just hanging there silently over the rails. I pinched my eyes shut, rubbed them, and looked again. It hadn't moved. I tried to judge its size, but the darkness and the snow made it hard to tell. It felt enormous, the way something enormous always feels when it's not supposed to be there. I called out over the radio, half expecting someone to answer, but the line was dead. Nothing but static. I kept slowing the train down. My hands were tight on the throttle. By the time we were maybe half a mile from the spot, the thing started to fade, like it was dissolving into the air itself. I blinked a few times, and it was gone. Just gone. I swear I didn't hear anything like it took off. No sound, no rush of air, no shift in the wind, just empty sky. I eased the train forward, shaking my head. I was muttering to myself, trying to make sense of it. I've been a conductor for 20 years. I've seen plenty of strange stuff, trees down on the tracks, wildlife, weird weather, but nothing like this. When we finally reached the exact spot where it had been, I noticed something else. The metal rails were warm. My gloves weren't enough. When I touched the side of one, the heat ran up my fingers. The air around it was freezing, barely 20 degrees, but the rails themselves were like someone had left them under a forge. I backed off the throttle a bit and ran my hand along a rail, trying to feel if it was just a localized patch. The heat ran for maybe 20 feet in either direction, then dropped off again. I couldn't explain it. No engine had passed through here in hours. The rails wouldn't be that hot. I went back to the cab, still rubbing my hands and glancing outside. The snow was falling evenly, and the tracks looked like any normal stretch of steel under a street lamp. I kept driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. Not like an animal watching from the trees. Something different, something deliberate. My breath was coming fast in the cab, and every time I glanced up through the windshield, I half expected to see the dark shape hovering behind the train or alongside it. But there was nothing. A few minutes later, something else happened. I passed a small siding where a few old cars were stored, and for just a second, I thought I saw movement, like someone standing on top of one of the cars, but it didn't make sense. The snow made it hard to see clearly, and by the time I looked directly, there was nothing. The siding was empty, abandoned, as always. I kept telling myself it was a trick of the snow, maybe the reflection of my own cab lights. By the time I got to the next signal, I was gripping the wheel tighter than usual. Everything else was normal. Tracks were clear, switches aligned, signals blinking, but my stomach kept twisting. The warmth in the rails stayed with me, an almost physical memory of where that thing had been. I checked again when we slowed for a curve, pressing my gloved hand against the steel, still warm. I called in a report at the next yard, careful with my words. "Something unusual on the tracks," I said, not wanting to claim anything more, because I know how it sounds. My dispatcher asked if I meant a vehicle or debris. I hesitated, then said, "No, nothing physical, just strange heat, and maybe something I can't explain." He didn't push it, just told me to write it up in the log. I went home that night, still unsettled. I tried to think of normal explanations. A maintenance crew, a new type of weather phenomenon, even some weird reflection from the snow. Nothing fit. The warmth on the rails was the part that made no sense. Steel doesn't heat itself in sub-zero air without a heat source. The next day, I went back to the stretch of track with a handheld infrared thermometer. Nothing. The rails were just cold metal now, exactly what you'd expect in the middle of January. No sign of warmth, no trace of anything unusual. It was like whatever had been there had vanished completely. I told a few coworkers later, cautiously, during a coffee break. They gave me the usual reactions: nervous laughter, maybe you just got tired, old man eyes playing tricks. I didn't press it. They hadn't seen what I saw. But I could still picture it hovering over the tracks, unmoving, silent, and then disappearing like it had never been there. A couple of nights after that, I drove that same route again. I kept my eyes glued to the horizon. Everything looked normal, but I kept imagining the rails heating up under something invisible. The thought made me tense up every time I passed that stretch. I tried to get a clear look from the cab camera, but it didn't record anything unusual. Even the signal camera at the siding didn't show movement. It was like the thing had existed for a few seconds, long enough to leave heat, then was gone without leaving a trace. I stopped thinking about it as much when work got busy, but occasionally I'd catch myself staring out the window at night, checking the tracks, feeling my stomach tighten. That stretch of steel still feels different to me. When I run my hand along the rails during inspection, I still remember that warmth, even though it's long gone. I've been back on that route dozens of times since. I've seen deer, snowdrifts, ice patches, even another freight blocking a siding, but never anything like that shape again. I don't tell people because I can't explain it and I don't want to sound crazy. But every time I pass that spot at night, my eyes flick up to the horizon first, and I feel the same quiet unease I did that January night. I don't know what it was. I don't know why it was there or why the rails warmed under it. All I know is that it happened. And I know that for a moment the world was a little less predictable, and that quiet stretch of track over frozen ground carried something I couldn't name. I was driving through the Mojave late one night, the kind of night where the desert feels endless and the stars are so bright you forget about the asphalt under your tires. I had left Barstow around 9, heading toward a friend's place near Baker, planning to get there before midnight. The heat from the day had mostly faded, but the air still held that dry, heavy weight that makes your throat feel scratchy. My car radio was dead, which didn't bother me. I liked the quiet out there, but every so often a gust of wind would whip across the flat land and rattle the mirrors, and I'd glance in the rear view like I was expecting something to be following me. It started about 50 miles outside of Barstow. I noticed a shimmer ahead, right over the middle of the road, like one of those heat mirages you see in the daytime, except it was dark out. My first thought was that it was some kind of reflection from the highway signs, or maybe a patch of asphalt that was still holding heat from the day. But the more I drove, the more it felt wrong. It was tall, hovering maybe 15 feet above the road, and it had this faint, wavering outline, like it was bending the light around it. I slowed down, watching it from my windshield. My headlights passed through it, and nothing reflected back. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't nothing either. It was like a distortion in the air itself. My phone was on the passenger seat, battery at 78%, charging from the car. I grabbed it instinctively to snap a picture, but as soon as I unlocked it, the screen went black. I hit the power button a few times, and when it finally came back on, it said 9%. I stared at it, thinking I must have misread, or maybe the phone had overheated or glitched. But the timing, it felt impossible. I kept driving, not wanting to get too close, but my curiosity was pulling me forward. The shimmer seemed to shift slightly, like it was aware of me, tilting just enough to the side as if testing my approach. No sound came from it. Nothing. No hum, no wind, no crackle, just this faint, oscillating heat haze that hung over the asphalt. The desert night was silent already, but this felt heavier, like the quiet had weight now. Then it moved. Slowly at first, lifting straight up, like it was a curtain being pulled off the ground. I slowed even more, gripping the wheel. I wanted to stop completely, but something in my gut told me to keep a safe distance. And then, without a sound, it zipped straight up, faster than anything I've ever seen. There was no blur, no shockwave, nothing to indicate speed. It just vanished into the black sky. I could barely process it, and my heart was thumping so hard I thought I might be able to hear it over the quiet. I blinked a few times, and when I looked back at the road where it had been, the asphalt was completely normal. I checked my phone again. 9%. No signal, no service, nothing. I started to feel a little shaky and maybe paranoid, but I told myself it was just heat and stress playing tricks on me. I shook my head and tried to focus on the road, but then the weirdness didn't stop. About 10 miles later, I saw movement on the side of the road. Shadows, small shapes that darted back and forth between the mesquite bushes. At first, I thought maybe coyotes or rabbits, but the shapes were too large, too fast, too coordinated. And they weren't running. They seemed to float a little above the ground, like the desert floor was bending around them. I slowed even more, craning my neck to see better, and every time I thought I'd catch a glimpse, they would vanish into the darkness. A little while after that, my headlights picked up another shimmer in the distance, off to the left side of the road, hovering above a dry wash. It was smaller this time, more like a column of heat than a full distortion. I couldn't tell how high it was off the ground, and I didn't even try to move closer. My heart was in my throat, and my hands were sweaty on the wheel. Then I noticed my speedometer flicker erratically, like it had reset, dropping from 65 to 0 for a second before jumping back. I passed the spot quickly, unwilling to linger. For the next half hour, nothing happened, just the long stretch of desert and my headlights cutting through the dark. I kept glancing at my phone. It stayed at 9%, and I couldn't get a signal or a GPS reading. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. Normally, I don't freak out on drives like this, but there was a tension building, a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. I saw it again, the shimmer right above the road this time, further ahead. I realized I was starting to track its behavior. It would appear, float for a bit, then shoot away. I slowed as much as I dared, keeping a mile or so back. My mind was screaming at me to turn around, to get off this stretch of highway, but I couldn't stop staring. Then the weirdest thing happened. A car appeared behind me, headlights dim, but moving like it was following me. I flicked my high beams, thinking maybe it was a regular driver, but they didn't respond. Just stayed there, a dark shape behind me. My first thought was to pull over, but something made me keep driving, like stopping would draw more attention. I started thinking about all the stories people tell about strange encounters in the desert, and every rational part of my brain was saying, "This is insane. There's nothing here." But then my gut tightened again when I realized the other car hadn't moved lanes or passed me. It just followed at the same speed. I wanted to call someone, but my phone wouldn't work. Nothing. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. No sound, no passing, nothing. I checked the mirrors, the stretch of road behind me, and the dark seemed empty. I finally saw Baker in the distance, the small cluster of lights promising normalcy. I slowed as I got into town, my pulse still high. The desert beyond looked empty and silent, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there had been watching me, or at least aware of me. I pulled into my friend's driveway around midnight, still staring at the rearview mirror. I stayed up for a while after I got inside, trying to piece it together. The phone was still dead, stayed at 9%, and I didn't have the nerve to go back outside. I checked the weather. Nothing unusual, no electrical storms, nothing that could explain a shimmering distortion hovering in the air. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about it, trying to rationalize, to find a logical explanation. Heat haze? Maybe. Some weird atmospheric anomaly? Possibly. But there were too many things that didn't fit. My phone dying, the movement of the shapes in the bushes, the car that wasn't really there, and the way the distortion moved, like it wasn't bound by any normal physics. I eventually got back home, and I've tried to talk myself down from it being real, but I can't. The desert's quiet at night when you're alone, and the silence feels like it's hiding something just out of sight. I haven't driven that stretch of road alone since. I don't tell many people about it. It sounds insane. Every now and then, I'll be driving or just looking at a dark stretch of pavement, and I swear I see a faint shimmer in the distance, just hanging there, like it's waiting. And sometimes when I check my phone, I can't help but glance at the battery life. I still don't understand what I saw that night, and I doubt I ever will. I woke up around 3 a.m. because my bedroom was bright. Not like the streetlights seeping through the blinds, but this weird flickering glow that seemed to fill the whole room. At first, I thought maybe a car had hit the power line outside or something, but when I looked out the window, the street was completely normal, quiet, empty, the kind of suburban calm you get at that hour. Then I noticed it. Across the neighborhood, maybe 2 blocks away, there was this oval of light hovering in the distance. It wasn't moving, not even a little, and it didn't flicker like a neon sign or a passing car. Just stayed there, perfectly still. I blinked, thinking my eyes were messing with me, but it didn't change. I grabbed my phone to check the time, 3:02 a.m., and the screen didn't light up right. The brightness seemed dimmer than usual. I unlocked it and the battery read 92%. I figured it was weird, maybe a glitch. I leaned against the window, watching the light. After maybe 30 seconds, the glow started to shrink. Slowly at first, then faster until it contracted into a tiny pinpoint, then vanished completely. Just gone. The street was back to normal, the houses dark, and the night quiet. No hum, no buzzing, nothing. Just nothing. I couldn't get back to sleep after that, so I got dressed and went outside. The air was cool, the kind of early morning chill that wakes you up in a way your bed can't. I walked to the end of my driveway, scanning the sky. Everything looked normal. No planes, no helicopters, no lights. Just stars and the occasional blinking streetlight. I went to the neighbor's side of the street, half expecting to see someone else out there, maybe with a flashlight. Nothing. Not even their porch light. It was like the whole block had frozen for a minute and then gone back to sleep. On my way back inside, I noticed the car in the driveway, mine, was off. The headlights were on. I was sure I'd turned them off before bed. My hands shook a little as I shut them off, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I had sleepwalked to the car. Maybe someone had come by. But the doors were locked and there was no sign anyone had been inside. I went back inside and checked my phone again. 27% battery. That didn't make any sense. I'd left it at 92% a few minutes ago. I plugged it in. It shot up to 28% slowly, like it had been drained in an instant. I tried to call my brother to see if he had experienced anything similar. I knew he was up late gaming, but the call wouldn't connect. Just a series of beeps. I sat on the couch, staring at the window. That's when I noticed something else, a shadow, or maybe a dark shape at the edge of the neighbor's yard. I could only see it because the light from the street lamp barely reached it. It was crouched low, completely still. I thought maybe it was a cat or a raccoon, but it stayed put, even when I moved to get a better look. Then, as if sensing I was watching, it slipped behind the hedge and disappeared. I tried to convince myself I was seeing things. Sleep deprivation, maybe. But my cat Oliver was acting strange too. He usually sleeps through the night on the bed, but he was pacing, ears forward, staring at the window, tail twitching. Every time I looked away, I felt like something was just beyond the yard, watching. I decided to go back inside, close all the blinds, and wait for morning. I sat on the couch, heart still racing, and tried to focus on something normal, like the hum of the fridge or the occasional car passing miles away. But then my phone buzzed. I hadn't gotten any notifications. Just buzzed. I picked it up. 9% battery. Down from 28% in maybe 5 minutes. I couldn't explain it. I shut the phone off and left it on the counter. Figured I'd deal with it in the morning. Tried to sleep again and eventually drifted off, though every noise outside made me sit up. The air conditioner clicking on, the wind brushing against the siding, even Oliver's paws on the carpet. Everything felt amplified. When I woke up, the sun was just rising, casting pale light across the yard. The street was normal again. No signs of anything unusual. My phone was dead on the counter. I plugged it in and it charged normally this time. Battery was back to 100%, no glitches. The yard was quiet, the neighborhood waking slowly. I tried to tell myself it was some weird combination of sleep deprivation and city lights, maybe a plane with its lights off, but nothing fits exactly. There's no pattern for it. Nothing that explains why a light would hover perfectly still, then shrink and vanish, or why my phone would drain that fast. I spent the day outside, scanning the street, looking up at the sky every now and then. No unusual lights, no shadows. My neighbor didn't see anything either. She's an early riser, walks her dog at 3 a.m. usually. I asked her if anything seemed strange, and she just laughed, said maybe I was dreaming. That night, I double-checked all the locks, made sure the blinds were closed. Oliver stayed by my side, unusually alert. Around 2:45 a.m., I noticed the street lamp across from my house flicker once. Just once. I didn't see anything else. I watched for hours, but nothing appeared. Still, the memory of that light, the way it hung there completely still for that long and then contracted, stays with me. I can't explain it, and the fact my phone kept draining like that part creeps me out the most. It's like some kind of interference, but interference from what? I don't know. I stopped checking outside at night, tried to let it go, but I swear, sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I see a faint shimmer in the corner of my vision. Not moving, not making noise, just there, at the edge of the neighborhood. And I know if I turn my head, nothing will be there. I've considered setting up cameras, but part of me doesn't want proof. I want to forget, almost. But part of me keeps thinking, what if it happens again? What if next time it's not just light and battery drains? I still live here. Nothing else has happened, at least nothing obvious. I try to sleep normally, though I wake at odd times, heart racing. And Oliver, he's still skittish at night, staring out windows, ears forward, tail twitching, like he remembers something I can't see. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if anyone else has. But I keep remembering that moment. The oval, still and bright, shrinking until it vanished, and it doesn't feel like something from this world. And the silence that followed, that total quiet, made everything else seem wrong. I haven't told many people. My friends would laugh it off, call me paranoid, or say I was half asleep. But I know what I saw. I know what my phone did. And I know Oliver knew something too. I haven't seen the light since. Not in weeks, not in months. But some nights, when it's dark and quiet, I still glance toward the edge of the neighborhood, almost expecting to see that faint shimmer waiting, perfectly still, watching. I was on my little boat, a 24-foot center console named the Minnow, somewhere off the northern coast of Maine. I usually didn't head out past 10 o'clock, but that night I had some fish to clean up from earlier trips, and the moon was almost full, so I figured the light would be enough. The water was calm, the sort that felt almost syrupy in the dead of night, and there was a sharp cold in the air, the kind that sinks into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I'd just gotten the lines in and was rinsing the deck when it happened. At first, I thought it was a lighthouse or another boat, but nothing on the radar. Then a beam of white light, really bright, cut across the water. It came from above the clouds, like a searchlight, but wrong. Too steady, too precise. Not swinging, not blinking, just sliding across the waves as if someone were sweeping them with a ruler. I froze. The beam was cold. I mean, the air around it almost seemed to suck the warmth out of me. My teeth were chattering, and my hands went numb even though I was wearing gloves. The water underneath the light looked like it had been bleached. It wasn't reflecting like moonlight. It was like the water itself had lost color. I tried to get the engine going to move away, but my fingers were slow, fumbling over the controls. Every instinct told me to just get out of there, but I didn't move. The light didn't just shine in one place. It slid in a pattern, almost like it was searching, and I couldn't tell if it was looking for me or for something else. Then, just like that, it clicked off. Not dimmed, not faded, just gone. The darkness returned instantly, thick and wet, like someone had pulled a blanket over the ocean. I sat there shaking, staring at nothing but black waves, trying to rationalize. Maybe a helicopter? Maybe some kind of weather drone? But no noise, not a hum, not a motor, nothing. Just silence and the water. That water. It was normal again, but colder than before, and it didn't make sense. I started heading back to the marina, keeping the engine steady. The waves lapped normally, but the sound felt different, hollow somehow. I tried talking to myself, out loud, to keep calm. I even cursed at the darkness, like shouting could make it less heavy. Nothing changed. A few minutes in, I noticed the fog. It wasn't dense, just a thin veil rising off the water, but it moved unnaturally, almost like it was being pulled along by something. It didn't swirl with the wind, it didn't drift, it just shifted slowly, smoothly, like it had a pattern of its own. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks, eyes adjusting to black water and moonlight, but my stomach told me otherwise. Then I noticed the compass needle flick, just a tiny jump, like someone tapped it, then it snapped back. Twice. 3 times. It never pointed away from north, but it hesitated. That shouldn't happen, especially not this far out with no metal overhead except my boat. I tried to call someone on the radio, the VHF, just to confirm I wasn't losing it. No response, just static. And then the weirdest thing, the static started sounding almost like breathing. Not mechanical interference, but a low, even hiss, like someone was right behind the speaker, inhaling and exhaling. My heart slammed, and I slammed the radio down. I glanced up at the clouds, thick now, low, and then I saw a faint glow behind them, almost imperceptible at first, like a lantern in a foggy window. It didn't move like an airplane light or a buoy. Just hovered, steady, and then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. No fade, no blink, nothing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'd been staring at the black water too long, that the cold and fatigue were making me see things. I kept moving, slowly. But the feeling stayed, like someone or something was watching from above, waiting for me to slip up, waiting to see if I noticed. Every small sound, the slap of a wave against the hull, a gull far in the distance, the motor vibrating, felt amplified. I was on edge the entire way in. Halfway back, I swear I felt the water under the hull shift differently, heavier somehow, like I was moving through a pocket of air and then into a pocket of something else. It wasn't waves or currents I recognized. The boat didn't rock, but the motion in my stomach told me something was off. I slowed down, just floating for a second, and noticed the silence. Not even the hum of the engine seemed right. The ocean around me had this hollow, muted quality, like the world had temporarily lost depth. When I finally saw the lights of the marina, it felt like stepping into a separate universe. Normal, warm, human. I called the harbor master to tell him I'd be in, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. Who would believe a beam of light cutting across the water, searching? Who would believe the fog moved like it had a mind, the compass flicking, the radio hissing like someone breathing? I tied the boat up and sat in the cabin, staring at the water through the window. Everything looked fine, quiet, peaceful. And yet, I couldn't shake the sensation that part of the ocean I'd been in was different now, like it had been touched by something I couldn't see. I went home after that, warmed up, ate some food, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that white light cutting across black water, smooth and relentless. I kept imagining it sliding, always searching, moving with a precision no human could manage. In the morning, I checked the boat. Nothing seemed damaged, nothing out of place. The waterline was normal, no signs anything had been below the surface except me and the usual marine life. Even the fog had disappeared. But I could still feel it in my fingers, in my chest, in the way the air smelled faintly metallic and cold when I breathed. I took the boat out a few nights later, tried to retrace my route. Nothing. No light, no fog, no feeling. Just water, black and indifferent under the moon. But the memory stuck, the weight of that moment pressing down. It's been a couple months, and I still think about it. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I imagine that beam sliding across my backyard, searching, precise, silent. I tell myself it was a trick of the mind, or a strange weather phenomenon, or some kind of plane or helicopter I didn't see. But nothing fits perfectly. Nothing explains the cold in the air, the way the water looked drained of color, the way the fog moved, or the radio. I haven't been back out past 10 o'clock since. The boat sits tied up in the marina, quiet. I still go out for day trips, nothing late at night, nothing past the regular routes. But sometimes when I'm alone on the water near dusk, I feel the weight of that beam again, pressing down, and I keep my head down, my hands steady, and I move. I've thought about trying to tell someone, Coast Guard, scientists, even a friend. But who would believe it? Not the way I remember it. It's real to me. That light was real. The cold was real. The silence was real. Everything else, I don't know. And that's the part that sticks the most. Not the beam itself, but that something like it could exist above the clouds, moving with purpose, unseen, and then just stop. I still see flashes of it when I blink. I still hear the faint hissing in quiet rooms, and sometimes, just sometimes, I catch myself staring at the sky, wondering if it's watching back. It was one of those rare nights where the sky over Cedar Hill was actually clear. No haze, no city glow creeping in from across the river, just a black dome scattered with more stars than you'd think possible. I'd been sitting out on the back deck with a blanket and a cheap thermos of coffee, trying to unwind after a long day. It was late enough that the neighborhood was completely still. No distant traffic, no barking dogs, not even the hum of someone's AC kicking on. Just me, the crickets, and the stars. I'd been leaning back in the chair, looking up for maybe 20 minutes, when I noticed one point of light that seemed sharper than the rest. It wasn't the brightest star in the sky, but it had this weird clarity to it, like it was closer somehow. I kept glancing back at it between sips of coffee. Then, out of nowhere, it blinked. 3 times. Perfectly spaced, the way a signal light would. At first, I thought maybe it was a plane banking and catching the light just right, but there was no movement, no streak or fade. Just those 3 flashes, then steady again. I sat up, suddenly alert in a way I hadn't been all night. I waited. A couple of seconds passed. Nothing. Then, from almost the opposite side of the sky, way over near the tree line, another point of light blinked. Same 3 flashes, same timing. I don't know how long I sat there, staring back and forth between them. I'd expected the first one to flash again, but it didn't. The second didn't either. Instead, they both started to dim. Not quickly, not like clouds covering them, just this slow, deliberate fade until they were gone entirely, leaving empty black where they'd been. I remember standing up without even realizing it, my chair scraping the deck boards. I scanned the rest of the sky, trying to find them again. My first thought was satellites, but I've watched enough passes to know how they move, and these hadn't moved at all. They'd been fixed points until they weren't there anymore. I sat back down eventually, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. Not in a paranoid, someone's in the bushes way, but in the sense that whatever had just happened hadn't been random. I kept telling myself it could have been coincidence, 2 unrelated stars dimming because of atmospheric conditions or something. But the timing of those blinks, the perfect match between them, made that hard to believe. A little while later, I noticed something else. The night felt quieter. The crickets that had been filling the air earlier weren't making any noise now. Even the faint rustle of leaves had stopped. I leaned forward, trying to hear anything at all, but there was just this strange, thick silence pressing in. My ears started ringing faintly, the way they do when you've been somewhere loud and suddenly it's dead quiet. I stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, just listening. Then a faint, high-pitched tone drifted in from somewhere overhead. It wasn't coming from the house. I even stepped inside for a second to check. And it didn't sound like anything electrical. It was thin and constant, almost like the sound a wine glass makes when you run your finger along the rim, but steadier. The tone lasted maybe 30 seconds, then cut off abruptly. The crickets started up again almost immediately, like someone had hit a switch. I sat there gripping my coffee mug, suddenly aware of how cold it had gotten. I don't know if it was the temperature or just me, but the air felt sharper, like when a storm's about to roll in. I finally decided to go inside. Not because I was scared exactly, more like I felt like I'd been somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, and the moment was over. Before I went in, though, I turned for one last look at the sky. That's when I noticed something else odd. Directly above the spot where the first star had been, there was a faint, perfectly straight line of light. It wasn't glowing bright. It was more like a pale thread, almost invisible unless you looked right at it. I watched it for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was a contrail catching moonlight, but it didn't move or spread. Then, just like the lights earlier, it faded out slowly until there was nothing left. I locked the back door after I came inside, even though I don't usually bother. I didn't check the sky again that night. I just sat in the living room for a while, staring at nothing, coffee cooling in my hands. The whole thing had taken maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like I'd been out there for hours. I didn't see those lights again, but for weeks after, every time I stepped outside at night, I caught myself scanning the sky, not for shooting stars or planes, but for something fixed, too still, waiting. I first noticed it the morning after. I was half awake making coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from the security app. Motion detected, 2:43 a.m. Normally, it's raccoons or the neighbor's cat cutting through the yard, but I checked anyway. The clip was 15 seconds long. For the first 7, everything looked normal. Grainy night vision, the usual faint glow from the porch light, a little mist near the ground. Then, at the 8th second, it was like someone hit a light switch. For exactly one frame, literally a blink, the yard was lit up like it was noon on a clear summer day. Full color, sharp shadows. And those shadows, they didn't make sense. The porch light is on the house, angled down, so everything should throw a shadow away from it. But in that frame, the lawn chairs had shadows pointing in 3 different directions. The maple tree's shadow split into 2, stretching away from points that didn't line up with any visible light source. Even the fence had this jagged, angular shadow that cut across the grass at a weird diagonal. The next frame went right back to night vision like nothing happened. No fade, no flicker, just night, then day, then night again. I sat there at the kitchen counter staring at my phone for a long time. The timestamp didn't skip. It read 2:43:08 on the bright frame, 2:48 on the next. No missing time. Around 9 a.m., I went outside to check the yard. Nothing looked disturbed. Chairs were in place, the gate was shut, the grass was wet from dew, but otherwise untouched. I even checked the porch light to see if maybe it had flared or something, but it's an LED fixture. They don't suddenly flood a yard with daylight. The weirdest part was the shadows in the clip. I tried to figure them out. If there were multiple light sources, maybe from neighbors' yards, they'd have to be blindingly bright to make the footage look like that. And I'd have seen them through my bedroom blinds. But I didn't see or hear anything in the night. I saved the video to my phone. Later that day, I showed it to my coworker, Eric, during lunch. He's into photography, so I figured maybe he'd notice something. He rewound the clip a dozen times, pausing on the bright frame, zooming in. He didn't say much, but at one point he frowned and asked, "What's that?" In the upper left corner of the frame, just above the fence line, there was something I hadn't noticed before. Not a shape, exactly. More like a smear of light. It wasn't lens flare. It was too sharp at the edges, like a solid object reflecting light. Except if it was an object, it wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sitting in the living room with the porch light off and the blinds cracked. Around 2, I muted the TV and just listened. The neighborhood was dead quiet. No cars, no voices, just the occasional creak of the house. At 2:40, the air outside felt different. It's hard to explain, but it was like the silence had weight. No distant hum from the highway, no rustle from the trees. Even my fridge seemed quieter. I stared out the window toward the yard, but nothing happened. By 2:50, I gave up and went to bed. When I checked the camera the next morning, there was nothing, just a squirrel darting across at 4 a.m. Over the next week, I found myself checking the footage every morning, hoping to catch something, but it was always normal. Still, I started noticing small things when I was outside at night. Twice I caught myself looking at the grass and realizing my own shadow didn't quite match the angle of the porch light. One time it was stretched way too far, almost to the fence, even though I was only a few feet from the steps. A few nights after that, I was taking the trash out when I thought I saw a flicker across the lawn, like a single strobe from far away, lighting everything for a split second. It was faint and fast enough that I wasn't sure if I'd actually seen it or if my eyes had just adjusted weird. I went straight inside and pulled up the live feed on my phone. Everything looked normal. I watched for 15 minutes and didn't see anything else. I still have that single bright frame saved. Every so often I open it and zoom in on different spots. The fence, the trees, the smear of light. It's crystal clear, sharper than the camera's usual quality. Like whatever lit the yard also boosted the detail. The more I look at it, the more I'm convinced the shadows aren't just wrong in direction. Some of them seem to bend, not curve like a natural shape. Bend, as if the ground under them wasn't flat in that instant. I've replaced the batteries in the camera, checked the wiring, even swapped the SD card. The system works fine. Nothing like it has happened again. But every night, I still find myself glancing at the clock around 2:40, just in case. It was just after 1 a.m. when I noticed it. I was in my living room, half asleep on the couch with the TV still on, when I realized there was this low, steady sound under everything else. It wasn't the fridge, and it wasn't anything from the show I was watching. It was deeper, like a bass note you could almost feel more than hear. I muted the TV, and the hum was still there. Not loud, but heavy, like it was pressing on the air. I stood up and walked toward the front door, and it got stronger. The street outside was quiet. I live in a cul-de-sac in the suburbs, so at that time of night there's usually nothing. No cars, no people. But the humming was definitely coming from outside. I stepped onto the porch, and that's when I saw them. Above the row of houses across from me, maybe a few hundred feet up, there was a cluster of lights. At first, I thought it might be one big thing with a bunch of lights on it, but the more I watched, the less that made sense. The lights, maybe a dozen, moved like they were separate but in sync, the way fish do when they change direction all at once. They weren't blinking like airplane lights. They were a solid white, almost bluish, each one about the same brightness. The pattern they made kept changing, sometimes tight, almost a ball, then spreading out, then tightening again. And every time they shifted, it was instant. No slowing down, no turning in an arc, just one position, then another, like frames being swapped out. The humming matched their movement somehow. When they spread apart, it got a little lower, and when they came back together, it went slightly higher. Not by much, but enough to notice. I stepped off the porch and into the driveway without taking my eyes off them. They were moving slowly across the sky, headed in from the west, but it didn't look like they were following a straight path. Every few seconds, they'd jerk into a new formation, always in unison, and keep going. It was hard to judge their size or distance. Sometimes they seemed closer, other times farther away, like the whole group was shifting its depth in the sky. I kept glancing at the houses, the trees, anything that could give me a sense of scale, but nothing matched up in a way that made sense. The night was completely still. No wind, no crickets, not even the usual distant highway noise. It was like everything had gone quiet except the hum. I thought about grabbing my phone, but the idea of looking away even for a second felt wrong. So I just stood there in the driveway, watching them creep closer. My chest felt tight, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. When they got nearly overhead, they shifted again, this time into a long, narrow line stretching from one end of the cul-de-sac to the other. Then they tilted, like the whole formation rotated on its side, and started climbing into the clouds. The humming grew louder for a moment, then dropped sharply as they rose. They didn't fade out. They were swallowed by the low cloud cover in less than 2 seconds. And then it was silent. Completely. I stood there for a good minute, staring at the spot where they'd gone. The clouds above were lit faintly by the streetlights, but there was no sign of them. I walked to the end of the driveway, half expecting they'd come back out on the other side, but nothing happened. When I finally went back inside, I noticed the clock on my cable box said 1:24. I'm pretty sure I'd been outside for less than 5 minutes, but it felt longer. My hands were cold, even though the air had been mild when I stepped out. I checked the local news the next day just in case anyone else had reported seeing something, but there was nothing. No mention of strange lights, no low-flying aircraft, nothing unusual with the weather. I haven't heard that sound again since, but every now and then, late at night when it's really quiet, I catch myself muting the TV just to make sure. I was out on the deck behind my cousin's cabin in northern Maine, trying to get a few long exposure shots of the Milky Way. It was late September, around 11 p.m., and cold enough that my breath showed in the air. The cabin sits on the edge of a small lake, maybe 20 minutes outside a town that barely has a gas station, so the light pollution is almost zero. The only light was from the stars, the glow of my camera's display, and a porch bulb I'd turned off before starting. I'd brought my tripod, a thermos of coffee, and a folding chair. The plan was simple: take a bunch of long exposures, see what I got, maybe try for a time-lapse later. My cousin Jamie had already gone to bed. He works early and didn't feel like sitting in the cold just to stare at the sky. The night was calm. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. It felt like the kind of silence where you start hearing your own heartbeat if you sit still long enough. Every so often a loon called somewhere across the lake, but otherwise, it was dead quiet. I'd been out there about 40 minutes when it happened. My camera was facing southwest, catching a patch of sky that had Orion low on the horizon. I was maybe halfway through a 20-second exposure when, out of nowhere, I saw a streak of light in the sky. Bright white, but not blinding. It cut diagonally downward for about 2 seconds, then made a perfect instant 90-degree turn to the left and shot horizontally until it disappeared. There was no curve, no arc. It was like it hit an invisible wall and just changed direction. The speed didn't change, no sound at all. I froze, hands gripping the armrests of my chair, watching the spot where it vanished. I remember thinking it must have been a meteor, except meteors don't turn like that. And planes, well, planes definitely don't. I didn't stop the exposure early. I let it finish, figuring the streak would be caught in the frame. I didn't even check the display right away, partly because I didn't want to mess up my night vision, partly because I kept looking at the sky in case it came back. I took maybe 5 or 6 more shots over the next half hour. Nothing else strange. Eventually, I packed up and went inside. The cabin was warm from the wood stove, but I remember feeling like my hands wouldn't warm up right away, like the cold had gotten in deep. I poured the last of my coffee and started going through the photos on my laptop. When I got to the shot that should have had the streak, it wasn't there. The stars looked fine, the framing was exactly where I'd left it, but the sky was empty. No streak, no faint blur, nothing. The shots before and after were the same. At first I thought maybe I'd bumped the tripod and it ruined the exposure, but the stars weren't streaked at all. No shake, no motion blur. I checked the timestamp. It was exactly when I'd seen it. I zoomed in, checked every inch of the image. Still nothing. I sat there for a while, running through explanations. Maybe it was too fast to register, but a plane's blinking light would show, and satellites leave long trails in exposures like that. I even thought maybe I'd hallucinated it, but it was too clean, too geometric. Jamie got up to use the bathroom and saw me staring at the laptop. I told him what happened, showed him the photos. He's not the type to joke about this stuff. He just frowned and said, "Weird," then went back to bed. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I went back out on the deck to see if maybe something physical had caused it, like a light reflecting off the lens from a boat on the lake or a car far off. But the line of sight was completely blocked by trees and the shore. From where I was sitting, there was no way a light source from the ground could have moved like that in the sky. That day was cloudy, so I couldn't try shooting again. But that night, I set up in the exact same spot with the same framing. I stayed out longer, almost 2 hours, just waiting. Around 12:30 a.m., I saw something again, but this time it wasn't as bright. A pale, almost gray light, like a dim star, drifted slowly across the same patch of sky. Then it stopped, just stopped moving. I stared at it, thinking maybe it was a satellite that just happened to appear stationary for a bit, but then it darted upward in a short burst before vanishing. Not fading, just gone, like someone flipped a switch. I checked the camera right away this time. Nothing in the frame. Again, the stars looked fine, no blur, no bright spots, nothing. At that point, I decided I didn't want to be outside anymore. Back inside, I tried to find anything online about lights over the lake. Satellites, space junk, even military aircraft. Nothing matched what I'd seen. The weirdest part came later that week. I'd driven back home and was showing the photos to a friend who's into astronomy. I didn't tell him what I'd seen, just handed him the shots and asked what he thought of them. He flipped through them, then stopped on the one from the first night. "This one's odd," he said, and pointed at a small, faint dot near the bottom corner of the frame. I hadn't noticed it. It looked like a dim star. But when he zoomed in, it wasn't round. It was more like a tiny, perfect triangle. I still have no idea what it was. The raw file has it, so it's not a compression glitch. But that triangle shape isn't in any of the other shots before or after, and it's nowhere near where I'd seen the streak. It's been a few years since that night. I've been back to the cabin a handful of times, always with my camera, but I've never seen anything like it again. Still, I catch myself staring at that same patch of sky when it's clear, just in case. It was close to midnight when I left my friend Kevin's place. He lives out in the country, about 40 minutes from where I rent a place in town. It had rained earlier that day, and by the time I was heading home, a thick fog had rolled in over the hills. I took the back road instead of the highway. It's shorter, but there are no streetlights and barely any shoulder. I've driven it 100 times, but that night, it felt different. The fog was dense enough that my high beams just made it worse, so I kept them low and drove maybe 30 miles an hour. The only sound in the car was the hum of the tires and the faint rattle from my dashboard when I hit rough patches. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of the moon through gaps in the fog, this pale, hazy disk that didn't give off much light. I'd just come down a long, sloping stretch with trees on both sides when it happened. 1 second, I could see the glow of the moon through the fog, and the next, it was gone. Completely blocked out, like someone had thrown a tarp over the sky. The darkness inside the car deepened instantly, and I knew it wasn't just a cloud because the fog itself didn't thicken. Something was between me and the moon. The shape, if you could call it that, was massive. I couldn't see any edges, no outline, just an absence of light overhead. It stretched far past the road in both directions. It stayed above me for several seconds, maybe 5 or 6, and then moved on, slowly. No wind, no sound, nothing. I didn't even realize I'd slowed to almost a stop until I glanced at the speedometer. My hands were locked on the wheel. The moonlight came back as suddenly as it had gone, dim and milky through the fog, and I just kept driving like nothing happened. A mile or so later, I pulled off onto a gravel turnout that overlooks a little valley. I think I just needed to catch my breath. I rolled down the window, half expecting to hear, I don't know, maybe distant engines or a low hum, but it was dead silent. Even the frogs and crickets I usually hear out there were gone. When I stepped out of the car, the first thing I noticed was the fog. It wasn't cool anymore. It was warm. Not hot, but like stepping into a heated bathroom after a shower. My jacket felt damp instantly, and the air clung to my skin in a way that didn't feel natural. The gravel under my boots was slightly wet, but the warmth didn't seem to be coming from the ground. It was just everywhere around me. I stood there for a minute, scanning the sky. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few yards up, but I kept expecting to catch some kind of movement above. I didn't. Then I heard a sound behind me, off in the trees. Not an animal, at least. Not any animal I recognized. It was faint, like a rustle mixed with a low, irregular clicking. It would stop for a few seconds, then start again, a little closer each time. I shined my phone's flashlight toward the tree line, but the beam just bounced off the fog, lighting up a wall of gray. I told myself it was just branches shifting in the breeze, but the air was still. No wind at all. I got back in the car and shut the door, locking it without even thinking about it. I sat there for a while with the engine idling, watching my own breath in the cabin. The temperature inside should have felt warm with the heater on, but it didn't. It felt like the dampness from outside had followed me in. My windshield started to fog up from the inside, even though the defroster was running. After maybe 10 minutes, I decided to just get home. I pulled back onto the road and took it slow, scanning both the sky and the edges of the forest. The moon stayed visible through the fog the whole way, but every time I went under a thicker patch of trees, I felt that same heaviness in the air. About 10 minutes from town, the fog thinned, and the temperature in the car seemed to go back to normal. I could hear insects again, a few frogs, even a dog barking somewhere in the distance. It felt like whatever that was hadn't followed me past the hills. When I got home, I went straight inside without unloading anything from the car. My clothes still felt damp, and the smell of the fog, this earthy, metallic scent, lingered in the fabric until I washed them the next day. I've driven that same road at night a few times since, in all kinds of weather. Nothing like that's happened again, but I still catch myself glancing up at the sky when I pass that turnout, just in case. I was still awake around 12:45 a.m., just scrolling on my phone in bed. The house was quiet except for the faint buzz from the fridge in the kitchen, when I realized there was another sound under everything else. It was low, so low it almost didn't register as sound at first, more like a vibration in my chest. I set my phone down and listened. It wasn't coming from inside the house. The fridge kicked off and it was clearer, a deep, steady hum somewhere outside. I went to the front window and peeked through the blinds. The street was empty, no headlights, no people walking dogs. Still, the hum was there, hanging in the air. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and still, with that faint smell of damp asphalt. The humming got stronger the second I was outside, not deafening, but thick, like it had weight to it. That's when I saw the lights. They were above the houses across the street, maybe 200 or 300 feet up. A tight cluster of white or pale blue points, about the size of bright stars, but they didn't twinkle or blink. There had to be a dozen, maybe more, and they moved together in a way I've never seen before. Not in a straight line, not circling, more like a school of fish shifting direction all at once. They'd dart one way, then freeze, then slide sideways, then tilt in a completely different direction without slowing down in between. No arcs, no curves, just instant changes. And the hum seemed to change with them, lower when they spread out, higher when they bunched up. I walked halfway down my driveway without thinking, eyes locked on them. The lights weren't huge, but the way they moved made them feel close, almost too close. Every time they shifted, it made my stomach flip, like watching something that didn't care about the rules I expected it to follow. There was no rotor noise, no jet sound. The whole neighborhood was silent except for that hum. Even the usual highway noise from a couple miles off wasn't there. The formation started drifting toward me, though drifting isn't quite right. It was like they were gliding on rails I couldn't see. They slowed just above the nearest row of houses. From where I was standing, I could tell they weren't attached to anything solid. There was just open air between them. For maybe 30 seconds, they stayed in place, shifting and reforming silently. I thought about grabbing my phone from inside, but the idea of looking away felt wrong. Like if I did, they might be gone before I came back. Then they started to climb, all together, as if pulled upward. The hum rose with them, not in volume but in pitch, until it was almost like a pressure in my ears. They entered a low bank of clouds hanging above the streetlights and were swallowed instantly. The second the last light disappeared, the humming stopped. It wasn't a slow fade, it just cut off like someone hit a switch. And the silence that followed felt different. Not just quiet, but empty. I stood in the driveway staring at the cloud cover for a long time. Nothing came back out. No lights, no sound, no movement. Then I realized I was holding my breath. When I went back inside, my clock said 1:08. I couldn't have been outside for more than a few minutes. but my hands were cold like I'd been standing out there for much longer. I checked the local news and weather the next day. No reports of aircraft, no scheduled low flights, nothing about strange lights. But the way they moved, I still can't place it. Planes don't move like that. Neither do drones. And I haven't heard that hum again. But sometimes late at night when it's dead quiet, I catch myself turning off whatever I'm watching just to listen. It was just after 9 p.m. when I took Jasper out for his last walk of the night. I usually cut through the little park a few blocks from my apartment because it's quiet and well lit. But that night, I remember the lights on the path were dimmer than usual. It had been raining earlier, and the ground was still wet with that damp smell of leaves and soil. The air felt heavy, like it was about to rain again, but the sky was clear enough that I could see a few stars between the drifting clouds. Jasper's an older golden retriever, slow and stubborn sometimes, so I let him set the pace. We crossed the street into the park, and I was halfway through fiddling with my phone when I noticed how still everything was. No cars on the nearby road, no wind in the trees, not even the hum of the usual traffic lights from a block over. It felt like the sound had been turned down. We were maybe 50 feet into the park when I saw them. 3 bright dots in the sky arranged in a perfect triangle. They weren't high up like stars or planes. They looked closer, maybe just above the far edge of the park. They were pure white, no blinking or flickering, just steady. At first I thought maybe it was 3 drones flying together, but they didn't move like drones. They drifted in unison, slow and smooth, like they were part of one thing. The spacing between them never changed. I stood there with Jasper's leash in one hand, just watching. Then the whole formation began to rotate, perfectly steady, as if the sky itself was turning around them. Jasper stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't growl or bark. He just froze, legs stiff, tail low. I gave the leash a tug, but he wouldn't move. His head was tilted slightly up, like he was watching them too. The lights kept rotating, maybe a quarter turn every few seconds. I tried to figure out what could cause that. Helicopters? No noise? Balloons? They wouldn't keep that exact shape, and there wasn't enough wind to push them evenly like that. After a minute or so, the triangle began to drift toward the trees at the far side of the park, still rotating. It wasn't fast, but the motion was hypnotic. Like it wasn't just the lights moving, but the space around them bending somehow. I realized my neck was starting to ache from staring. I crouched to check on Jasper, thinking maybe I could coax him forward, but he wouldn't even look at me. His whole body was tense, and his ears were pulled back. I'd never seen him act like that before. The lights slowed their rotation until they were back in the same position they'd started in, then they just stopped. For maybe 5 seconds they hung there, completely still. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Then one by one, they winked out. No fade, no dimming. Just gone. As soon as the last one vanished, Jasper relaxed. He didn't bolt, but he started walking again like nothing had happened. The ambient sounds of the neighborhood seemed to come back all at once. Distant cars, a dog barking somewhere, the faint buzz of the streetlights. We walked home without saying, well, me saying anything. I kept glancing up at the sky, half expecting them to reappear, but it was just empty. Back in my apartment, I tried to think if there was any event or air show that might explain it. I even checked local forums and weather reports. Nothing. I didn't take a photo. I didn't even think to. My phone was in my pocket the whole time. The strangest part is how Jasper acted. He's normally curious, even in weird situations, but that night he wouldn't go near the spot where I'd first stopped. For the next few days, anytime we walked past the park, he'd slow down and give it this wide berth, like there was something there he didn't want to deal with. After about a week, he went back to normal, but I still haven't walked through the park at night since. It was sometime after midnight when I woke up. I didn't know what time exactly because my phone was buried somewhere in my pack, and I wasn't about to unzip my sleeping bag to go hunting for it. What woke me was this faint, irregular crunching sound, like someone walking on loose gravel. The sound carried in that strange, muffled way things do at night in the woods, where you can't tell if something is 10 feet away or 50. I lay there for a bit, trying to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon nosing around or a deer passing through, but it wasn't quite right for that. The sound was too steady, slow, measured steps, and it kept a straight, deliberate path. No pauses, no sniffing, no rustling in the underbrush. Just crunch, 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 like boots on a driveway. The problem was, there wasn't a driveway. I was camped in a small clearing I'd hiked to earlier that day, maybe a quarter mile from the main trail. The only gravel was the ring of pale stones marking the edge of the clearing. I sat up, listening harder. My eyes were adjusting, picking up the faint silver of moonlight filtering through the branches. The crunching got closer, close enough that I knew whatever it was had reached the edge of the clearing, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a person. At least, it didn't move like one. A faint white glow. Not bright, more like the light from a dying flashlight, slid slowly along the tree line. I don't mean it shone on the trees. It was in the trees, weaving behind them but staying visible, like the glow itself was moving. It made no sound, no footsteps, no twigs snapping, just that steady, shifting light. My mouth went dry. I didn't move, I just watched it drift along, maybe 30 feet away, tracing the edge of the clearing like it was circling. It wasn't swinging like a lantern or swaying like a flashlight beam. It just floated sideways, low to the ground, like it was following a rail I couldn't see. At some point, my hand found the zipper of my tent. I was thinking if it was someone messing around, I needed to see more, or maybe yell to scare them off. I eased the zipper down, slow as I could, but even that tiny metallic sound felt loud enough to give me away. When I finally opened the flap enough to stick my head out, the glow was gone. No sound, no movement, just the clearing, the dark trees, and the cold air on my face. I sat there for maybe a minute, scanning the tree line. I didn't hear it leave. I didn't hear anything at all, actually, not even the usual nighttime noises. No crickets, no wind in the leaves, dead quiet. I pulled the flap closed and sat back inside, listening. I kept thinking I'd hear it again, more crunching, maybe coming from the other side, but nothing. I must have sat there for another half hour before I finally unzipped the bag and grabbed my flashlight. The beam cut across the clearing, lighting up the pale stones, the fire pit, the low grass. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. I swung the light toward the trees where I'd seen the glow, but there was nothing, just trunks and shadows. I walked to the edge, sweeping the light over the ground. No footprints, no disturbed grass. The gravel ring was untouched. When I turned back toward the tent, I noticed something that made me stop. My backpack, which I'd left under the vestibule, was now sitting upright in the middle of the clearing. I hadn't touched it since I'd gone to bed. I walked over and checked it. The straps were buckled, the zippers still closed. I opened the main compartment. It was all there. Food, clothes, phone. Nothing missing, nothing added. Just moved. I didn't sleep much after that. I sat in the tent with the flashlight in my lap until the sky started to lighten. In the morning, the clearing looked normal. No footprints in the dirt. The gravel ring was undisturbed. The only sign anything had been there was my backpack, sitting exactly where it had been when I'd found it. I packed up and left, cutting my trip short. I didn't look back when I reached the trail. I was driving back from a friend's place in Green Hollow, which is one of those towns that barely shows up on a map. It was past midnight, maybe closer to 1 in the morning, and the roads out there are the kind where you can go 10 minutes without seeing another car. Just narrow asphalt, thick tree lines, and the occasional gap where a field opens up. I'd been on County Road 6 for a while, half listening to an AM station that was cutting in and out, when I noticed something up ahead on my right. At first, I thought it was a street lamp, bright, yellowish light, hanging still in the dark. The thing is, there are no street lamps out there. No houses close enough to warrant one, no poles along the road. I slowed down without really deciding to, pulling over onto the gravel shoulder. The light was maybe 200 yards off the road, over an open patch of land. It was perfectly still, like it was hung from an invisible wire, too high to be a tractor light, too low to be a star. I killed my engine so I could roll the window down and listen. Nothing. Just the crickets and the occasional rustle from the grass. After sitting there for maybe a minute, it moved. Not up or down, not in an arc, just a smooth sideways glide, perfectly level, like someone had grabbed the whole scene and slid it on a track. It didn't bounce, didn't tilt. The way it moved made my skin crawl, not because it was fast or flashy, but because it felt wrong. It was almost too steady, like it wasn't dealing with gravity at all. I watched it drift toward a low hill on the far side of the field. The light didn't dim or flicker, just kept its same warm glow until it slipped behind the hill and disappeared completely. I waited for it to reappear on the other side, but it never did. I sat there longer than I meant to, headlights off, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. My eyes kept playing tricks on me, making me think I saw faint movement in the dark beyond the hill, but nothing solid. I finally started the car again, and that's when I realized something else. There weren't any poles or wires anywhere near that field. The road had been empty in both directions, and I knew there weren't any utility lines running across that stretch. As I eased back onto the road, I noticed the radio was just static. I spun the dial and every station was either dead air or the same faint hiss. That AM station I'd been listening to earlier was gone. About 5 minutes later, I saw another light ahead, lower to the ground this time. I thought maybe it was a car coming from a side road, but as I got closer, it resolved into a farmhouse porch light way off in the distance. Normal, steady, fixed to the ground. I actually felt relieved, which seemed silly, but it made the earlier light feel even stranger in comparison. The rest of the drive was quiet, but when I pulled into my driveway, I glanced at the clock in my car and frowned. The trip back usually takes about 30 minutes. I'd left my friend's place around 12:45, and even with pulling over for a few minutes, I should have been home just after 1:15. The clock said 1:42. I told myself I must have sat there in the car longer than I thought, maybe 20 minutes instead of 5, but that didn't feel right. I wasn't tired enough to lose track like that. I went inside, made tea, and tried the radio in the kitchen. It was fine. Clear stations, music, late-night chatter. I almost called someone to tell them what I'd seen, but it felt ridiculous to explain. A floating street lamp that slid sideways into a hill? It sounded like something I'd made up. The next day, I drove back out that way in daylight. The field looked normal. Patchy grass, no structures, no tire tracks. The hill was just a gentle rise, maybe 10 feet higher than the field, with nothing behind it but more land sloping down toward the woods. No sign of anything that could have hung a light out there. I stood by the side of the road for a while, trying to picture it again in my head. Same spot, same height, same steady glow. But in daylight, it was just empty space. I woke up because the curtains were bright. Not a streetlight glow or the neighbor's porch. It was a steady, pale wash that moved across the wall like someone had put a flashlight against the fabric and left it there. I sat up and my phone read 2:17 a.m. The house was otherwise exactly as it always was. My shoes by the door, the coffee tin in the kitchen, the fan on timer in the hallway, so I knew I wasn't dreaming. My name's Aaron. I live in a narrow lot house on the edge of town, backs onto a strip of scrub and the small river people fish from in summer. It's quiet most nights. Tonight the radio didn't come on. Nothing mechanical ticked. There was just that light through the curtains, pulsing the way a heart does when you can see it through someone's shirt. The first minute, I told myself it was the moon, but the moon was elsewhere in the sky, and a moon doesn't blink like that. I pulled on pants and a sweatshirt over bare feet, went to the back door, and opened it up. The air smelled like rain even though the forecast called for clear. The grass was cool under my feet. The light was directly ahead, above the strip of trees by the river. It filled the yard and the sky over it so I couldn't make out any stars in that patch. It was the wrong kind of white, not warm, not cold, like a photo flash left on and dimmed to a slow throb. It made no sound. No hum, no mechanical whining, no distant motor. The air didn't move any differently inside that pool of light. The trees didn't sway more or less. My neighbor's dog didn't bark. In fact, some animal down by the river, an owl or a raccoon, I couldn't tell, started calling and then stopped abruptly, like someone muted the world. I stood on the patio and watched it pulse. Once, twice, 3 times. I thought about every rational explanation I could. A construction floodlight, someone with a generator up on the far bank, a police helicopter. None of them fit. I could see the neighbors' houses to the left and right. Every window I could see was dark. There were no beams, no moving searchlights, nothing reflective in the trees. It wasn't close enough to smell anything, but it wasn't so far away that I felt removed. It was a little too close. When something doesn't make sense, everything small piles up. I remembered the motion sensor on the garage that had gone deaf 2 nights ago. It hadn't clicked any lights when I came home. My truck's clock had been 3 minutes off this morning. I chalked it up to the battery I changed. The neighborhood Facebook group had a post earlier in the week about a strange humming some people on the south side heard at 11 p.m. I thought those things were small, disconnected, until I stood there and realized I'd been noticing little electrical hiccups and odd noises over days and not connecting them. I told myself to call someone and then clapped a hand over the phone because my voice sounded thin in the night. Who do you call for a light over your backyard? I thought about dialing the non-emergency police number and felt stupid. The sensible part of my brain wanted to go back inside, lock the door, and wait for morning. The rest of me wanted to walk out into that pool of light and see what it did. I took 3 steps off the patio, my bare feet sinking slightly in the damp grass, and for a second the world felt larger, like the yard had deeper edges than usual. The light pulsed and seemed to lean, not dim, but shift so the center narrowed. I kept walking toward it without meaning to, took another step, and then something, maybe just the way my ears registered distance, made me stop. In that still moment, the light blinked twice, faster than before, and then it was gone the way you put your thumb over a flashlight. Immediate, complete. There was no travel, no descent, no fading. One heartbeat it filled the yard, the next it wasn't there. The stars reappeared where it had been. The trees were silhouettes again. The world returned to the textured quiet of suburbia, the fan in the hallway and the muffled heating noise from houses 3 doors down. The animal sounds came back slowly, tentative at first, then whole. My neighbor's dog woke up and started to bark at something on the street. I stood there for a long time, peering at the place the light had occupied, like it might reconstitute itself. My phone read 2:24 a.m. I realized I'd lost 7 minutes. I don't say that lightly. If you keep your phone on the bedside and you think you were awake the whole time, a lapse of minutes feels like a fall. I checked the time again just to be sure I wasn't reading it wrong. 2:24. The porch cam, an old doorbell camera I set up when packages started going missing, was asleep, its LED dark. I haven't bothered to link cameras into some cloud service. I plugged the card into my laptop, transfer the footage, and delete it. The camera had power because the ring around it blinked when I opened the app, but the recorded clip was corrupted. There was a 1-second file that opened into a single white frame, and then nothing. Every other clip before and after played normally. I walked the yard and checked the fence line, the riverbank path, the tree trunks. The grass where I had stepped felt normal. There were no scorch marks, no footprints, no smell of ozone. The air didn't taste metallic or burned. It tasted like yard air. By then, my hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. I came back inside, closed the door, locked it, and sat at the kitchen table with the light off and the blinds open a crack so I could see the backyard. I watched until my eyes wanted to cross. Nothing came back. Around 3:10 a.m., I finally went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. Every creak had a pressure to it, like someone might be moving outside the frame of my sight. In the morning, I told my neighbor Casey about it while we watered the lawn. He laughed at first and then frowned when I told him the time and the way the doorbell cam looked. Weird, he said. My dad said he saw a bright thing over the river from his porch last night. Thought it was a drone at first. I asked if he'd heard anything at 2 a.m. He rubbed his eyebrow and said he might have heard a muffled something but fell back asleep. He checked his security footage and showed me a clip with nothing unusual but a timestamp gap. 2 minutes of no recording right around 2:17. By noon, I had 3 bits of strange evidence that none of us could explain. My door camera had a corrupted file, Casey's system showed a blank spot in the middle of the night, and my phone's clock had me losing 7 minutes. None of those prove anything except that something odd happened. I carried on the day as if my life could be a thing and not a story. Work emails, a dry cleaning pickup, dinner with a friend who wanted to talk about politics and not lights in the sky. But when I wasn't saying anything out loud, the yard pulled at me. I kept imagining the way the light had narrowed before it went out, as if someone had focused it and then shut it off. At dusk, I went back down to the riverbank and stood where you can see the backyards in one ribbon. There was no burned patch on the far bank. The water flowed the same. Fireflies drifted like tiny, unrelated stars. I don't have an explanation. I don't have an authority to which I can point and say, they'll tell you, because no one has told me anything. I've got cameras, I've got a neighbor's testimony, and I've got a tight little pocket of lost time stitched into the night that I walk around like a foreign object in my pocket. If I tell people, they ask if I'm okay and offer a cup of coffee, and then the conversation moves on. They want me to be physical again, to laugh about it with them. Sometimes I do. Other times I stand at the back door and watch the sky, because if something comes back, I want to see how ordinary the world looks when it arrives. I woke up because the curtains were too bright. It wasn't a slow leaking glow from a street lamp. It was a steady, pale light that washed the whole bedroom like someone had hung a sheet and shone a flashlight straight at it. I checked my phone out of habit, 2:11 a.m., and for a second, I pinned all the normal explanations to the back of my head. A car with high beams, a neighbor leaving the porch light on, a late-night delivery truck. None of them fit the way the light pressed itself into the room, filling the corners without throwing hard shadows. My name is Ben. I live in a small split level at the end of a cul-de-sac, yards away from the marsh that runs along the edge of town. We get quiet nights out there, the kind where you can hear frogs and the occasional truck down on the highway. Tonight, though, the whole house felt keyed up. The kitchen clock on the counter had stopped at 1:47 earlier that day, and I hadn't thought to change the battery. My old radio, the one I keep tuned to a talk station for background noise, had been acting weird all week, static whenever the show got serious, then snapping back. Little things, ordinary, and I hadn't connected any of them until the light was on the curtains. I pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt and padded to the back door barefoot. The air outside smelled like the marsh after rain, wet and green, even though the forecast was for clear skies. The light was directly over the high cedar at the far edge of the yard. It made the trees look like paper cutouts. It was close enough that the stars in that quarter of the sky didn't show at all. The light flattened them like someone had erased a patch of the night. It made no sound, no hum, no motor, no prop wash that you feel more than hear. The only sound was the small, insistent chirp of the smoke detector in the hallway. Battery low, I told myself, and the distant, surprised bark of Mrs. Lopez's dog 2 houses over, which cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. For a moment I stood there on the concrete step, holding the door frame with both hands, and talked myself through what it could be. It didn't feel like what could it be so much as what should I do? I went down the steps onto the lawn because that was the only option that didn't feel stupid. Call 911, drive into town, wait inside and pretend I was asleep? The decision to go outside wasn't brave. It was the path that let me be where the light was. The grass was slick with dew, cold through my bare feet. The light pulsed, not a bright strobe, but a slow, regular breathing. On, off, on, like the glow of a phone screen when someone's checking it at the edge of your awareness. As I walked toward it, my watch, an old analog I'd worn for years, took its own little extra second to tick. I remember thinking how exact the pulse was, how mechanically precise, and then how irrational that thought already sounded. When I got to the middle of the yard, a shadow from the cedar fell across my boots. The light narrowed for a sliver of a second, like it had been focused through a lens and then opened back up. I took another step and the pulse quickened, not alarming but noticeable, and then, just like that, the light was gone. No fade, no travel. One moment the sky was white above the cedar, and the next it was a normal black patch full of stars. The silence that followed was not silence exactly. It was the restoration of ordinary sounds. The far highway hum, an owl's tentative call, the creak of a neighbor's screen door. My watch read 2:17. My phone, which I'd left unlocked on the kitchen counter, said 2:19 when I checked it later. I had a sense, odd and discreet, that a minute or three had shifted around while I hadn't been looking. I went back inside and tried to act normal in the bright rectangle of the kitchen light. I peeled an orange, the skin sliding off in one long strip, and listened to the house. The radio in the living room was dead when I turned it on, plain black static no matter what station I tuned. When I checked the doorbell camera app on the phone, the live feed showed the sidewalk and the marsh path in the moonlight. Everything ordinary. I scrolled back through the recordings and found one long, unbroken block of footage from 1 through 209, and then a file that was a single white frame at 210 and nothing else until 220 when normal footage resumed. I replayed that white frame until I felt like my eyes were burning. It was a single washed image, no shape, no detail, as if the sensor had been blinded. I called my brother, because you call a brother when you don't want to be alone with a small impossibility. He answered on the third ring, sleepy and grumpy, and when I told him what I'd seen, he laughed. "Probably a police helicopter," he said, like that, explained it, and then stopped when I told him the way the light pulsed and how it had vanished when I'd stepped into the yard. He told me not to be dramatic, not to make a thing of it. It would have been the end of the conversation if his wife hadn't come on speaker to ask whether we should check the house cameras, whether I was sure everything was locked. The thing felt smaller when it was being dismissed and bigger when it wasn't. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched in that space where the light had been. The hair on the back of my neck prickled the rest of the night. I checked the windows 3 times and secured the doors. I slept in fits. Whenever I drifted, the house sounded louder, like the pipes and the furnace and the wind were rehearsing for me. At dawn, I walked the yard with a flashlight. There was no trace on the grass, no scorch, no scent of metal or ozone. The ground was firm, and the dew had flattened under my footprints as if nothing had happened at all. I ran into Mrs. Lopez on her way to walk the dog. She said she had heard a strange whistle around 2 and thought a train must be near. She hadn't seen anything. Down at the marsh path, a couple walking their terrier told me they had been up late watching the meteor shower and that they remembered a bright flash over the cedar that they assumed was a falling star. Both of their versions felt like puzzle pieces that almost fit, but the edges didn't match mine. The whistle, the flash, each explanation was plausible on its own, but didn't explain the other little details. The canceled recording, the way the radio had gone dead, the way every creature in earshot seemed to take a breath and then stop. I tried to go about the day like a person with obligations. Work emails, a dentist appointment I'd rescheduled twice, but the night kept threatening to fold back over me. I avoided the backyard until dusk, like there was an etiquette to approaching the place where something odd had been. My neighbor Tom, who runs the hardware store and fancies himself unshakable, came by and clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't let it get to you," he said, which is the thing people say because they don't know what else to give. When the sky went deep and the creek frogs started up again, I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the cedar. The stars were normal, pinprick sharp. I told myself that no one else might ever notice it, that a dozen people could see a thing and give it a dozen different names, or no name at all. I thought about the white frame on the camera and the way time had seemed to compress. I thought about the way the light had disappeared the instant I stepped into its reach, like it had been an outer shell I wasn't meant to cross. I sleep in my own bed that night, the curtains closed tight. The house seems ordinary. Pipes, fan, the low pulse of the fridge, but everything smells faintly like the marsh after rain. Around 1 in the morning, I woke to the curtains moving a little, and my heart climbed into my throat until I realized it was only the cat perched on the sill watching something outside. I left the curtain undisturbed and listened instead. The night went on, ordinary and strange at once. I don't have a name for what I saw. I don't have a measurement, a photograph I trust, or an authority to call who might say, "Yes, that happened," and mean it in a way that rescues the ordinary. I have the image of a pale, steady light, its slow pulse, the blank white file on my camera, and the sense that stepping into certain quiet things makes them stop being there. I sleep, I work, I make coffee, and at odd moments my mind pushes against the shape of that light, trying to find edges to grip. It keeps sliding away. I was on the last leg to Farmington night flight, no weather to speak of. Clear sky, moon a sliver, the kind of night that makes you think of how small everything is. I was trimmed for 5,500, autopilot engaged, a half-empty thermos chilled inside the console. The radios were quiet except for the occasional flight-following handoff and a distant cargo truck on 121.5 sounding like it was 3 counties away. It was a routine leg. I had flown it dozens of times. Out the left window, something moved into the cone of the landing light and I almost missed it, because at first it read like a star. Then it didn't. It was too close for a star. It was at about the same angle off the nose as the wingtip, maybe 5-6 miles to the left, and I could swear it was at our altitude. It wasn't blinking, no red or green nav lights, no white strobes, just a dark, hard edge against the sky. The kind of shape that eats up starlight and holds it. At first, I told myself I was seeing traffic I hadn't expected. An unlit crop duster, a banner tow. I checked the transponder, toggled to ident, and listened for any TCAS warnings. Nothing. The EFIs showed the usual blank where traffic would display. My transponder was transmitting and the ADS-B box was showing the other traffic we'd heard earlier, so the equipment seemed to be working fine. Still, it held position relative to us like it belonged in the same lane of air. I called center, Cessna 7KQH, visual traffic, left 2 o'clock, same altitude, say intentions. The voice came back from the other side of the headset clear and practiced. 7KQH, center, roger. We show no primary or secondary target in your area. Maintain present heading and altitude. No target. Copy, I said. I double-checked the heading on the HSI, glanced at the GPS track, then looked again out the window. The object had matched my ground track and my ground speed. Not perfectly in the way 2 airplanes occasionally sit beside each other, but it kept pace as if it were glued to our velocity vector, the dark edge maintaining that impossible station next to me. I disengaged the autopilot and put the yoke over, just to feel the motion. I banked left 3 degrees to get a better look, and the thing did something I couldn't find an easy word for. It rolled. Not banked or turned, but rolled, as if gravity had loosened its hold and it turned on an axis sideways, a slow, lazy roll unlike anything an airplane normally does. It slid then, laterally, exactly opposite my bank, with a fluidity like a model in water. It never accelerated in the hard sense. There was no plume, no wake. It simply moved. We could have been a matched pair of dancers and it complicating the choreography without effort. I called center again, voice steadier than I felt. Center, 7KQH. Right now the traffic's holding exactly parallel. It's rolling away to the west. Static hummed for a moment and the controller answered. A tone I now know means they were running the scope to see primary returns. Negative, 7KQH. No targets. Are you receiving any interference? Negative on interference, I said. My headset had that small, precise noise the radios make when something is wrong, like when the squelch is being coaxed. I flipped the radio to ground to check the other frequency, confirmed the squelch, checked the standby, toggled the audio panel. Nothing. All the systems behaved normally. Pitot heat on, vacuum steady, alternator green. The clock in the panel blinked, then resumed. It was a list of ordinary things doing ordinary things, and the extraordinary thing outside doing nothing that fit. I reached for the binoculars I keep under the glare shield. They were cold and damp to the touch, like they'd been somewhere colder before I grabbed them. I held them up and got the shape. Vague, geometric, not like the rounded belly of most aircraft. The edges appeared matte, not reflecting the landing light at all, but the silhouette was crisp. I could see no windows, no tails, no prop blur. At the scales involved, I would have expected something to flicker or shimmer. There was nothing. It just existed and matched us. When I turned to take the head-on view, it did something else. I banked right and nudged the throttles to keep airspeed steady, because I didn't want to climb or descend and hand control back to the autopilot if I could help it. The object didn't follow in a straight chase. It reversed the feel of the moment by sliding away as if it had been tethered on a nearly invisible string, and someone eased it free. The roll completed like a lazy turn, and then it drifted. I'm being clumsy with words because I don't have a better one. Sideways down the horizon, and it did it with no noise, no thermal wake, the way a whirl of smoke disperses, only in reverse. I called approach on the guard channel, told them my tail number and that I had traffic visually at 1 o'clock, matching my altitude and gliding parallel. Approach, 7KQH. Excuse me, can you verify if any aircraft are in OMA sector? They came back quick. 7KQH, negative, we have no targets on primary in that sector. We're showing your transponder and other known traffic, but nothing else. So I asked the only question that mattered. Can you show me primary? Can you physically see anything on radar that corresponds to what I'm looking at right now? If we could, the controller said, we would, 7KQH. We have nothing. Say position and distance again. I gave a guess. Pilots estimate poorly at night. Approximately 2 to 3 miles left, same altitude. It was 2 minutes of me watching it go from being a curious puzzle to not being there at all. At some point, the silhouette narrowed and brightened like a lens-bending light. I thought it might ignite, strobe, or exhaust, some simple physical reveal. Instead, it tightened into a point, and then no phase change, no spray, nothing that you could point to as a mechanism. It simply winked out. One moment there was that indigo cut against the lower sky. The next, it was gone. No transit across the stars, no streak. The place where it had been was empty, like someone had lifted a birdcage. After that, all the small things unsettled in the cockpit turned larger. My watch, a cheap pilot's watch, was 5 minutes fast and then corrected itself. The thermos slid on the console for no reason when I eased back to neutral trim. My phone, which I had set to record when this started, had one file that corrupted into a single unopenable blob, and a second file that, on playback, showed 3 frames of a dark smear and then a blackness my phone described as unsupported. I told the controller I had recording and they'd mark it in the strip for the engineers, but they didn't ask for the file. They asked if I wanted to divert. I did not. There was nothing to divert to that made sense. We continued into Farmington like a ship resuming course after a passing, insignificant fog. My hands hovered a little above the yoke on the approach, as if not touching it would be safer. The wind held steady, the runway came up, and the landing was exactly the kind of wash of rightness these instruments train you for. On the ground, I taxied in slow and left the lights on, because the cabin still had that odd electric cooling I couldn't explain. I filled out the paperwork in the FBO between customers and tried to get someone to look at the files. Maintenance looked at my transponder traces and the ATC printout and at my GPS log. They found nothing out of order except one tiny anomaly in the GPS track where the ground speed showed a half-second blip. The controllers sent me the radar tape. It was clean where we'd been. This sort of thing happens sometimes at night, one of them said, like that explained anything. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't think there'd be a report. I flew home in the morning and filed the routine incident notes and told my wife an abridged version because I didn't want to hand her the thing that felt like an accusation of instability. I kept turning that empty patch of sky over in my head. When I talk about it, people look for a category. Weather balloon, experimental drone, a trick of the eye. None of those fit what I saw or didn't see. If anything has changed me, it's the way I check everything twice now. The transponder, the squitter, the frequency, the wing flex, even the thermos under the glare shield. I still fly at night. It's a job and I've been doing it a long time. But when I'm on the leg to Farmington now and something dark sits where a star used to be, I call it in a little sooner. The controller on the other end will still say nothing is showing. They always do. The bright point was over the maple before I understood what I was seeing. I was standing by the grill, turning a beer with my thumb because the evening was warm and the backyard was quiet, and that way it gets when you let the sprinklers time out and the kids go inside. The point hovered low, just above the roofline of the neighbor's garage. At first I thought it was a plane. There are always light trails on this stretch of sky, but it wasn't moving the way planes move. It descended slowly, like someone easing a paper lantern down by hand. It stopped a few degrees above the western horizon and hung steady and too bright. It wasn't that bright as a flare or as streetlight. It had the kind of hard, focused quality stars have, thin, sharp, and it made the maple cast a small, weird shadow on the lawn. I remember thinking that I shouldn't be able to see that shadow in the half light, that somehow the geometry was wrong, and then realizing I'd stopped breathing. Before it started, there were little things that didn't add up. The porch light had come on, then flicked off twice by itself, like someone was checking the switch. Our dog, Gus, who will sprint through thunder and keep chasing the ball, even when it's pouring, was sitting on the back step with his head tilted as if he were listening. The crickets had quieted. It felt like the neighborhood had leaned in and gone still. Down the street, someone's TV must have been turned up because I caught a line of dialogue through a window, a human noise out of place in the hush. I considered waking Lena. She was in the kitchen finishing up dishes. I called her name, low, almost casual, because nothing about a falling star seemed worth panicking over. She opened the back door and stood beside me in her slippers. We watched in silence for maybe a minute. The light didn't blink, didn't flicker. It just hung there, impossible and slow. I pulled my phone out to take a picture. My thumb fumbled the face unlock, and the screen stayed black for a second longer than it should. When it lit, the camera app opened to a grainy frame where the tree lines looked like they'd been smudged. The bright point registered as an overexposed smear, nothing like what my eye was seeing. I switched to video. The phone warmed in my hand faster than usual, like something inside it was working harder than it should have to hold the image. I filmed 10 seconds, then 20. When I played it back, the file stuttered and dragged like someone had slowed the tape, and the final frame went to black. The audio was fine. You could hear Lena's socks on the porch wood, the faint hum of the neighbor's refrigerator, but the actual light was rendered in the recording as a blank white that didn't map to what we had watched. It took me a second to realize the way my watch was behaving. My cheap digital watch blinked from 9:07 to 9:21 and then to 9:08, like it was trying on different times to see which one fit. Lena noticed it too and said, "Weird," and laughed, as if laughter could untwist the oddness. Her laugh sounded small in the air. The light paused the way a hand pausing over a chess piece would, deliberate and expectant. Then it moved again. Not down, not away from us, but up. Straight up. Like someone had given it a slingshot pull. It accelerated in a way that makes your stomach feel like you're on a drop ride. It went from faintly below the roofline to impossible in the space of a single blink. For a breath, it reminded me of a comet drawn in a child's book, a hard head and the suggestion of a tail. Then the tail was gone, and all that remained was a pin of light racing into the upper dark, smaller and sharper and gone. It happened so fast that Lena and I both said things that don't make sense when you say them. Did you see? Where did? The neighbor's curtains shuffled as people leaned out of windows. Gus shot up, startled, then stood and stared at the empty sky like he expected the light to reappear. The maple's shadow was normal again, just the broad, soft kind the moon makes. The radio in the truck on the street tuned itself to static for a couple of seconds, like it had been listening to something, and then the signal cut. Other small impossibilities crept up afterward. The sprinkler by the back fence, which I had shut off at 8, had been cycling when Lena and I came back out 5 minutes later. Its timer was set to off. A bit of the lawn where the light had hung, exactly where the shadow had been, felt colder under my bare foot, like stepping on stone warmed by ice. I knelt and ran my fingers through the grass. There were no scorch marks, no singed stems, nothing you would see if heat had sat there. Just damp, cool soil, the smell of earth, and the mechanical tang of the grill. We walked the perimeter, shining our phones like flashlights, calling for Jonah and Mira next door to come out if they had seen anything. Jonah, in his robe and sneakers, stuck his head over the fence and said, "I thought it was an airplane, or a drone, or hell, a light on a fishing pole," and looked embarrassed at his own list. Nobody had any good answer. Mira was already inside. She waved at us from the window, worried more about the time than the sky. Her cat sat on the sill, eyes like coins, and then disappeared through the cat door. The rational thread starts to unravel at moments like that. The backyard is where explanations usually sit. neighbors, radio towers, satellites, prank devices. I ticked them off in my head and threw each out as I thought of it. There were no drones over our neighborhood at 9:30 on a Tuesday. No emergency calls went by our scanner. The airport isn't that direction. Satellites don't dive toward the horizon and then shoot straight up. And yet, something had moved in a precise and deliberate way where no known object should be able to. We sat back on the porch steps for a long time, each of us holding the blank beat of our phone screens like they might show something on playback. Lena said maybe it was a meteor, and I told her a comet was visible last month. That's what your brain does. It matches pattern to pattern. I kept thinking of the way the light had made the maple cast that one small impossible shadow, and of how calm the rest of the world had been. The sky, after the tick of light, went ordinary. Stars where they should be, a thin band of haze over the western trees. The moon was a dry coin. When we went back inside, Gus followed, then sat at the kitchen door, refusing to come further. He watched the window, ears tilted forward, and blinked slowly, like a person waking from a dream. I locked the back door, because locking felt like an action that could hold the night steady. Lena rinsed the dishes, turned the water off deliberately, and moved as if that would set things right. I replayed the 10-second video until my phone was warm and the battery dipped from 90% to 80%. The file skipped the bright part, then froze. Then the screen went blue for a second and settled on someone else's face, a face I didn't recognize. My thumb hovered over the delete key and then went slack. I couldn't tell Lena any more useful things than it moved wrong, which, to be honest, was the only honest way to put it. I fell asleep later with the window cracked and the night sound coming in. The distant highway, a dog 2 streets over barking, a passing car that turned its headlights away from our house. In the dark, the memory of that hard point of light, descending low and then being tugged straight up, felt like an accent on the ordinary. It didn't make me afraid the house wasn't safe. It made me feel small and watched in a different way. The way you feel when a stranger looks at you in a grocery store and knows something you didn't intend to show. By morning, there was no trace. The maple looked the same, the sprinkler timer was on its usual cycle, and Jonah banged a hammer in his garage like nothing unusual had happened. Gus wanted breakfast and left the window alone. I told no one any frames of the story that would make it sound like the supernatural. I stuck to details, the time, the way the camera failed, the cold patch of grass. Lena said, maybe it was nothing, like a benediction. I wanted it to be nothing, but part of me keeps checking the west when I step out at twilight, waiting for a precise star-like point to ease down toward the horizon and then vanish up like someone pulling a string. I drove into the mist without thinking much about it. You could see it, hanging low over the fields, even from 100 yards away, like someone had laid a sheet of cotton over the road. It wasn't the usual highway fog that eats your headlights and leaves you squinting. This stuff glowed from inside, a pale, even light that made the wet paint on the guardrail look like a strip of moon. My radio cut to static the moment the front of the car slid under it. The hiss filled the dash, then the whole world tuned down a notch, like someone had pressed mute at the edges. I tapped the steering wheel to the beat of the static. The highway was empty. It was late, later than I meant to be, because I had stayed at the shop organizing cabinets for an extra hour, telling myself I'd be home in time to make breakfast for Sunday. There was a diner sign back where I'd turned off, a soft blue, and a truck idling at the far exit. Other than that, nothing. The mist was a low ceiling, and it made everything feel small somehow, like the world had been tucked into a shoebox. At first, I thought the radio had simply lost reception. It happens when you slip between towers, old crap in a cheap car. I thumbed the dial. The static was the same no matter what station I tried. I told myself I should turn around, go back to the light of the interstate. But the fog had a peculiar hold, a softness that made the idea of reversing feel wrong. I drove slower, one hand on the wheel, the other touching the leather where the heat from the morning's coffee had stayed. There were small, stupid things before the gap. Things that were only strange because they're not supposed to be. The highway milepost that usually slid past at the speed limit seemed to skip. 34, then 38, then 43. The digital clock in the dash flashed 2:07 and then, a breath later, 2:07 again. A pickup that had been a quarter mile ahead faded out of view, and then, when I glanced at my mirror, wasn't there in any reflection. The taillights I remembered seeing were simply gone, like someone had turned off a distant string of Christmas lights. There was a sound, too, muted and constant under the static, like the note of a generator far off. I didn't have a way of knowing if it was the car or the air itself making that thin, low hum. My ears plugged for a second, then popped, and I blinked to clear my vision. The mist smelled faintly of metal and the way puddles smell after a storm, except it hadn't rained. The smell went through the cabin and left the upholstery smelling like nothing at all, as if it had been scrubbed. The road surface in the haze wasn't ordinary either. Where the painted lines met the mist, the color bled slightly as if the paint was melting into the air. I remember thinking that I should have been more afraid than I was, but instead I had that animal calm you get when you realize you have to keep doing the everyday thing or you'll fall apart. Keep steering, keep the wheels straight, keep the speed from creeping up. There were no other cars for miles. The only two soft lights were the diner sign and some lone lamp on a farm that showed a neat square of yard. Everything else swallowed. When I came out the other side, the radio popped back to life with a country station and a woman talking about the weather as if nothing had happened. The differential between hiss and talk was so sudden it made my skin march. For a second, I couldn't remember what song was playing, and I felt my hand on the wheel with a tightness that surprised me. My watch, the cheap one I've had since high school, said 2:14. I had no memory of the 7 minutes in between. I checked the car clock and it said 2:14 too, like some tiny pact had been made in the dash. I ran the route in my head, thinking maybe I had drifted off for a blink, slammed a kaleidoscope of small images together. The town line sign, the diner, the mists inside, the glow, static. Nothing in there explained where 7 minutes went. No memory of hitting the brakes, no recollection of a turn, no bobble on the phone, no evidence on the road that something had happened. My hands felt sticky in my gloves. The air tasted clean and ordinary. I'd noticed odd things before that night. A porch light in town that wouldn't burn out for a week, the store's digital sign flickering with the same line of text for hours on end, but those feel like civic quirks. This felt like something else. There was a heaviness in my jaw and the taste of stale coffee and the smell of that metal again, quiet as a memory on my tongue. My phone showed no missed calls, no notifications, no time jumps. The GPS route still placed me on the straight shot home like I hadn't veered. I drove the rest of the way with the windows cracked a little, the cold air unlucky and real. At the stoplight near my street, a kid on a bike rode past, headphones on, singing to himself. The real weight of the time drift hit when his watch said what my watch did, and I had that moment where I couldn't match my hour to anything but the glow of the neighbor's porch. Did you hit something? I wanted to call him, to ask everyone in sight, and instead, I drove up my drive and killed the engine. Because doing the thing that keeps you anchored, turning the key, pulling the handbrake, opening the door, felt like a ritual to reset whatever had loosened. I checked the car all over. The oil was where it should be, the tires were hard, there were no new scratches on the bumper, my coffee cup was still upright in the holder. The floor mat in the driver's side had a few specks of something dark I couldn't name, but they might have been there before. The radio had the memory of the last station, like always, tuned in, waiting. I stood in the doorway of the house and let the cold until I could feel my nose again. The early sun over the trees, pale and uninterested, made the frost on the lawn look like watered glass. I meant to tell someone, call into the shop or text my sister, but I didn't. There wasn't an obvious purpose to telling them a story about 7 missing minutes and a low inner glow. I made coffee slowly, the kettle sing the same note it always did, and while I stood there, the image of those 7 minutes was a blank in a much longer reel. I could point at the edges, the mist, the static, the smell, but no fingers would meet in the center. It was as if a strip of film had been removed from some old movie, and when played back, we were supposed to pretend we hadn't noticed the cut. In the days since, I've gone back over that stretch of road during the day because people do that when something strange happens. They look for wear and tear, for a reason, for proof. The farm lights are the same. The diner looks like it did. A yellowed menu and a man sweeping the sidewalk. Mile markers sit where they should, one by one. The glass in my watch is a little scratched from the trip to the toolbox last month. My radio works fine on its usual frequencies. Static comes only when I'm somewhere with bad reception. Once or twice, driving home at night now, I'll see a patch of the neighbor's field that looks as if it has been lit from below, like the glow I saw, a soft and impossible light that doesn't belong to any lamp. I blink, and it's lawn and fence, the way lawns are. Sometimes I tell myself maybe I dozed, maybe a backroad truck's headlights flashed in the mirror, maybe there's a less interesting explanation scaled up by coincidence. Other times there's just the memory of the hiss and the hum and the exact quiet of my car under that ceiling of stuff, and the knowledge that when I looked down my clock said exactly the same minute twice. I don't have a story with an ending. I have the thing itself and the small, steady business of living around it. I got home, I made coffee, I went to sleep. The 7 missing minutes sit in my head like a pause between breaths. I saw the lights before I heard anything wrong with the night. They threaded through the furse ahead of the switchback. A neat little row of pale pinpricks, moving like somebody had strung a thin line of tiny lanterns and was shaking it gently. They didn't make any sound at all. They threaded and wheeled between trunks, dipping low under branches, then rising and weaving again, almost as if they were following the trail where a person would walk. For a second, I thought of campers with little LED markers, morons with phones lighting their way. And then I remembered I was alone on the ridge, and there was nobody on the trail that night. My headlamp was slung around my neck. I hadn't turned it on because there was a moon, big and white and full enough to throw shadows. I had my pack lighted dimly, the red LED near the zipper blinking. The air smelled like damp earth and pine pitch. My breath came out in a thin fog that stung my lungs. I stopped, just like you stop when you see deer on a road, the way your skin notices the movement before the thought does. The lights moved as if alive. They were not spaced like people, more like the pattern of attentive things. 3 in a cluster, then a single one that stalled, then 4 that spun like a thought. They had a soft warmth to them, like candlelight seen through glass, not the cold, hard white of LEDs. They didn't reflect on the wet needles or the glossy bark. Sometimes one would slip behind a trunk and come out a hair's breadth to the right as if it had gone through the trunk. I told myself not to be stupid. I told myself it was swamp gas, will-o-wisps, the kind of old-sounding explanation you think is ridiculous until you see it. I had been hiking with Maya and Tom earlier. They were out in front, moving faster than I was. But they had peeled off at the rocky pitch where the trail drops toward the creek. I had lagged because my knee was acting up, complaining when the slope steepened. The plan was to catch them at the switchback and maybe stop to eat. By the time I stepped out of the trees onto the little bench of trail, the lights were ahead of me, a sinuous line of tiny suns that didn't belong. I started walking. My boots barely made a sound on the packed soil. The night swallowed the click of buckles and the scratch of cloth. The lights threaded forward, and each time I thought I'd catch up, they turned and slid just out of reach, like they were curious and cautious at the same time. My heartbeat went to my throat. It's an odd sensation to feel your own blood like that, loud and private. I felt watched, but not in the way you feel when a person looks at you. This was wider, like the way a room knows you're in it. When I had maybe 50 yards to them, a breeze shifted. The pines on the left side. Somewhere below, a branch cracked, but it was a small sound and not the kind that explained what I was seeing. Every bird hush I know, the sudden stop of night jitters when a hawk passes, had happened before those lights appeared. The crickets had thinned to nothing. I realized then that I could not hear Maya's laugh on the wind, didn't hear Tom's footfall, and that the dark, which had been full and healthy, had gone thin and very close. My headlamp sat unused, a weight against my chest. I told myself to flick it on. I told myself to call out, "Maya, Tom, you there?" Those things make sound, though, and sound is final. I kept quiet and crept forward, because curiosity has a gravity I can't seem to resist even when common sense says to go back. The lights reacted. They did the thing animals do when you make a small movement they can understand. A dart, a collective twitch, and they rose. They rose not like light tied to a body, but like little living points that could choose a path through the air. They scattered up between the tree crowns, a flock of sparrows stacking and twisting, and then, sudden and silent as paper on a breeze, they stopped. They hung there, midair, maybe 50 feet above the trail, arranged in no pattern I could name. Some were in a tight little cluster like a child holding bunches of stars. Some were spaced out like notes on a sheet of music. They didn't flicker. They didn't sink. They didn't move at all. The moon washed through them and turned the bark of the pines silver. The lights had a steady, honeyed glow that neither burned nor reflected. I must have been holding my breath because my lungs stung and the fog of it rolled out in a white puff. My hand went, without my thinking, to my phone in my pocket. It was cold. The screen woke and showed me the lock screen with the time, 11:42, and no notifications. My compass app, the crude digital arrow I'd used more for fun than navigation, spun a lazy half-turn and stopped, showing north in the wrong direction. My watch read a different minute. The second hand quivered. These are small, stupid things, the kind of details you notice only because your mind is desperate for something to explain the big thing. I put the phone back, unused. Then the lights winked off. Not all at once. One would go dark, like a bulb being twisted, and then another and another. The pattern was almost casual, like eyelids blinking. When the third light went, that mid-air hush felt even deeper. I remember thinking absurdly that I could still see the moon and the stars, that the sky was ordinary enough, and that made the things dangling between the branches seem more unnatural than they might otherwise have been. One by one, they blinked out until there was nothing left but the moon and the quiet and my own breath. It was so immediate and mundane in its ending that for a second I was annoyed. Annoyance has a way of filling the slot left by fear. It feels sturdier. I called out then, a small, stupid human sound, "Hey!" and the echo came back thinner than my voice. I stood there until my legs felt numb. I thought of turning on my headlamp and walking back to camp, of calling Maya or Tom, but my hands were lead. I told myself that whatever had been there had gone, and that was, if not an explanation, at least a closure. I walked forward to the place where the lights had been and kicked at the soft duff of needles with the toe of my boot. There was nothing, of course. No scorch, no residue, no sign that light had been hung on the night. Just the usual damp leaves and a little offended beetle scrambling away. When I reached the clearing where the creek runs, I found Maya and Tom sitting on an upturned log, their headlamps off, faces pale with worry. "We heard you call," Maya said. She had been down by the water when I slowed, she said, and thought I had turned back. Tom's pack lay open with a map peeking out. They'd seen nothing. When I asked them to explain what I'd seen, they shrugged the way people do when they want to be reasonable and keep living. "Maybe fireflies?" Tom offered. It might have been simpler if they'd seen it too. There's an easy unanimity to a shared oddity. But they hadn't, and their suggestion felt thin. We hiked back the way we had come in a loose, silent line, each of us moving on a different small current of thought. The trail that night was the trail that had always been there. Roots, stones, a place where once my boot had slipped and I'd landed with a scraped palm. Familiar, ordinary. As we walked, a dog barked somewhere in the distance, and the sound cracked like relief. At home later, in the pale hum of my kitchen light, I scrubbed at my boots and thought about the lights hanging in the trees. I found fragments of explanation in every mundane thing, reflections, pranksters, some atmospheric oddity, and none of them sat right. There was no evidence to show, no photograph on my camera, no burned spot in the bark. When I looked at the place where the lights had been, in memory, it was like trying to stare at a face you'd seen once in a crowd. The outline stayed, but the detail leached away the more you moved in. I made coffee, the kettle clicking single notes, and waited to see if the memory would feel ordinary in the light of day. It didn't exactly. It sat like a small stone in my shoe, not injuring, only present, always noticed. The bobber dipped once, twice, then sat up like nothing had happened. I was about 3 hours into an overnight shift on the lake. Cold coffee in a thermos, a cheap headlamp clipped to the bill of my cap, everything set to the simple rhythm of line out, line in. The water was a flat sheet under a clear sky. I liked nights like that. You didn't have to think about much besides the next cast. A heron cut the quiet with a slow wing beat and landed on a far piling. I watched its silhouette against the stars, thinking about how steady its neck looked when it froze to wait. My float bumped again, and I set the hook out of habit. Nothing. I reeled in a line that looked exactly the same as when I let it out. There were little things that first felt like regular fishing annoyances. My watch, an old analog I'd worn since college, ticked a beat behind, and then caught up. A distant cabin light across the inlet blinked once and stayed dark for a longer minute than it should have, like someone had put a thumb over its switch. The frogs that live in the marsh on the near side had been noisy, but now their chorus thinned to a thread and then stopped altogether. It was the kind of silence that made the small sounds in the boat big. The scraping of the oar against the hull, the soft clink of my lure pulling against the rod tip. I moved to grab another bottle of coffee, and the thermos cap stuck, which was stupid. Brand new, I thought. I pried it, pulled too hard, and when the cap came free, a thin arc of steam rose and vanished as if the night inhaled it. Those tiny things stacked up like cards and made me a little aware of the dark around me, the way you notice a loose floorboard just before you step on it. At first, I thought the odd reflection was a trick of the ripples. The sky was a clean scatter of stars, and the water near my bow mirrored them like glass. Then, a patch of brightness moved on the surface that didn't seem to belong to any star. It wasn't a shimmer or a passing wake. It was a plane of light with a straight edge, as if a sheet of metal had been laid flat on the water and tilted just enough to catch the starlight differently. I put my hand on the rod and stared. The patch wasn't parallel to the sky. It answered to no wind. When I leaned forward, the glow in the water slid left. When I peered over to the right, it moved right. It moved the opposite way of my head, which is the first honest piece of panic I felt, the float bobbing in tune with my heartbeat. I set the rod down and stood, boots hollow on the boat floor. The LED on my headlamp washed the interior in a small, soft cone. The world beyond stayed black. The reflection held its angle. A perfect rectangle of light hung on the surface, a looking glass that should have shown sky and trees, but showed instead an almost white plain, like an unmarked billboard seen from the wrong angle. It was too clean. Water doesn't hold a straight corner that long unless something's under it. I reached for the binoculars on the seat, the cheap field glass I've used for deer and distant boats, and lifted them to my eyes. Through the lenses, the water's mirror was the same bright plane. When I followed that plane up, because that's what you do, you trace the thing you can't understand, the image changed. The brightness in the water tilted, then broke apart, and I saw the edge of a shape slice upward against the starfield. A crisp, hard line, not the vague oval of a plane or the soft silhouette of a low cloud. It was an angle, a straight corner that suggested a corner of something larger. It didn't make a whooshing sound, didn't throw out a beam or a glare. It simply sat in the sky for a breath, a dark wedge against the stars. The binoculars trembled in my hands. The wedge looked like a piece of paper held up between two fingers. Thin, absolute, sharper than anything the atmosphere should have allowed. I lowered the binoculars because my eyes burned and the wedge had a feeling to it, like when you stare too long at the sun and everything around the sun goes wrong. When I looked back, the patch on the water had slid again, and the wedge in the sky had smudged into nothing the way a wet finger smears chalk. The stars were where they should be. The frogs were still quiet. The heron had folded its wings and disappeared as if it had never been there. For a few long seconds, the only sound was the slow drip of water off my oar and the faint rattle of the boat against the dock. I tried to tell myself it was a trick. Exhaustion, optics, a trick of reflection. And I reached for my phone to snap a picture because people always do that. Hold up a rectangle and hope the camera records the thing so your memory doesn't have to carry the whole load. The screen lit, the camera app opened, and the phone's battery icon gave me a little afterglow of assurance. I held the phone steady and touched the shutter. The image was simply stars. The small white plane, the wedge, nothing. The photo was the ordinary world as if my eyes had been lying. I tried again. The viewfinder registered only the sky, clear and reasonable. I thumbed the screen and the photo gallery showed the two plain pictures, and then the preview thumbnail glitched for a fraction of a second like a skipped frame before it snapped back. I put the phone down because I didn't like the sensation of that half glitch and started the motor. The little outboard thudded and pulled us toward the slip. The lake stayed calm under the stern, no wake, no eddy of disturbance. I kept the throttle low, wanting to test whether movement would bring the reflection back or move it away. Nothing returned. Back on the ramp, the dock boards hummed up under my boot soles. I tied the line, unstrapped the gear, and felt like someone else wearing my clothes. The road home was the old one, the 2-lane that curves through pines with a strip of yellow in the middle that seems to hang you in a small tunnel of light. I drove the route slow, headlamp on white, radio off. My phone buzzed once, a morning text from my sister asking a simple thing about potatoes for Sunday dinner, and the normalcy of that message was a small ballast. I answered with something banal about picking them up because even a wrong thing is a thing you can hold. At home, I left the boat keys on the counter and sat at the kitchen table with my palms flat and the thermos cap beside my elbow. I didn't tell anyone that I saw a hard corner in the sky. You don't start with that. You test the edges first with small truths. So I said something about the frogs being odd tonight, and my neighbor asked if the fish had been good. It was room enough for me to say yes, and nothing about the bright plane that had vanished between the stars. I keep going back through the night in my head, thinking of how ordinary everything was until it wasn't. I have photos that don't show what I saw, and a thermos whose cap stuck for a stupid moment. I have the memory of a shape with an impossible edge, and the sound of the heron's wing beat when it passed over the lake, and the way the water held a patch of light like a second sky. None of it fits neatly. I slept badly that night, and when I wake at odd hours, I find my hand reaching for the headlamp on the nightstand, as if light, any light, might make the edges in the dark behave themselves. I go fishing again sometimes, the way you go back to a place you got lost to see if the path remembers you. The lake has been quiet and ordinary on every trip since. The stars sit where they're supposed to. The frogs sing again. Every now and then, in the corner of the kitchen window, I think I see a straight line against the dark, where there shouldn't be one. And I look up fast the way you look when you hear your name said by someone behind you. Nothing is there, and then the ordinary things keep going. I keep the binoculars in their case now, next to the old watch, where both of them make sense, and neither of them explains the rectangle of light that didn't belong to the stars. I had pulled over because I needed to stop staring at the road. It was one of those late drives after a double shift, my head hollowed out from fluorescent lights and the radio, and the stretch of Old Mill Road where I stopped was the kind of place that felt like into a different hour of the night. No houses, a ditch on either side, a single orange street lamp every half mile that left the space between them a soft black. I killed the engine, left the dash clock glowing, and leaned back with my hands on the steering wheel, trying to let my eyes refocus. It was humid. The air smelled like cut grass and exhaust. Crickets were steady, not loud but constant. A couple of minutes in, I noticed a blink far off, a dim headlight rolling toward the intersection 2 miles down, the kind of approaching car you expect to pass and leave you alone again. I watched it get to the lamppost near the mill, and then it was like someone flipped it off. The light was gone a full second before it should have been, like it vanished between poles. The silence took on a different edge after that, the crickets folding a hair quieter. I told myself I was being jumpy, and reached over the stereo to turn the radio back up. Static, hissing under nothing. The display read 12:07. I remember checking the time because I wanted to know how long I'd been sitting there, and because time matters when you're trying to convince yourself you're not totally wrecked. The analog of the place lines up in my memory. The lampposts, the warm air, the smell of the car's leather. That's when the rearview mirror filled with light. Not a headlight, not a beam sweeping in from the road. The whole surface of the mirror just flashed white, like someone had put a tiny sun where my rearview normally was. It wasn't a sharp flash, not like a camera. It was a flat, clean white that took up the whole rectangle and stayed there for an odd, soft second, bright enough to repaint the interior in pale color. The glove compartment, the curve of my steering wheel, the tiny scratches near the gear shifter, everything went white in the mirror. And yet when I looked up through the back window, there was nothing. Just the black road, the ditch, a patch of cattails. No vehicle lights, no people, no faint shape that could explain where that mirror light had come from. I turned in my seat, slow and stupid, like I was trying to be careful. The angle is enough to show you the road behind the car and a little of the embankment. There was absolutely nothing there. No headlights, no flash, nothing that would have caused reflective glare. The street lamp behind me threw a narrow cone of orange across the pavement. But beyond that, there was the same black ribbon of road stretching off into nothing. When I turned back, the mirror was normal, just a dark little rectangle showing a slice of empty road. The dash clock read 12:21. I remember this part exactly because my brain did a stupid little loop trying to reconcile it. 12:07 to 12:21, 14 minutes gone in the space of a breath. I sat with my hand frozen over the stereo knob and stared at the numbers like they might fess up if I looked long enough. I checked my phone. It was one of those automatic lock screen times, the quick glance you give without thinking. 12:07, the same time pattern as before. My watch, 12:08, which meant I hadn't even closed my eyes for a full minute. The dash clock alone had leapt forward, and it was the only thing that had done it. I got out of the car. It was ridiculous. The night bit at the back of my throat when I stepped onto the shoulder. The gravel under my shoes was cold. I walked to the trunk and opened it just to make sure everything was where I'd left it. The gym bag, the jumper, and they were. No sign of being moved, no mud, no prints leading away except mine. Standing there, the stretch of road looked normal in that boring, official way. Streetlights hummed. The ditch swallowed the night. Nothing glowed or pulsed. Nothing that would explain the mirror acting like a window into something else. My heart was doing that flinty, clumsy thing where you feel like you might need sugar or water or an ambulance. I went back to the driver's seat and turned the engine over, trying to push the moment away by doing something ordinary. The car cough started on the third turn. Nothing dramatic, just that mechanical reluctance old cars have when the battery's lazy. I took a breath and drove off, keeping to the center of the lane like I was the only vehicle on Earth. I pulled onto the main road without breaking pace. For the next 10 minutes, I kept glancing in the rearview, half expecting the white patch to hospital lamp me again. The mirror showed the familiar, boring sweep of the road receding, a tiny patch of street lamp orange shrinking into the dark. The dashboard clock ticked forward normally after that, not skittering in time jumps anymore. My phone held steady on its timestamp. The radio, which I'd set back to something boring, came in clear. It felt like I had snapped some string and everything had put itself back into place, except that there was 14 minutes that were not in any of the devices I rely on except the car. When I got home, I checked everything twice. The thermostat was untouched. The front porch light came on when I pushed the switch with the same throb it always makes. My wife was up folding laundry in the living room and asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes and lied that I'd taken a longer smoke break out by the car. I fired off a text to a friend, a dumb line about being a tired wreck, because you look for small, tidy confirmations when the world seems off. The timestamp on the text matched my phone and my watch, 12:08. My watch was an old analog and sometimes it hangs a beat when I forget to wind it. But it matched the phone and not the dash. There was no explanation. Later, I called the dealership just to ask if the dash could misbehave like that. Could it jump? The kid on the other end said probably a loose connection, maybe a software hiccup, if the car had been hit by a spike. He asked if I'd had any electrical storms. I told him no. He asked if anything else had happened. I hadn't wanted to mention the light because I'd already thought about how insane it sounded. But when he said spike, I thought about the mirror being a white square and the way the radio had hissed in the passing car that looked like it blinked out. "Just get it checked," he said. "Bring it in tomorrow." I slept badly. When I woke, the little sandpit of my memory for those 14 minutes had the same stale smell as old coffee. It's not that I was trying to prove something to anyone, I was trying to prove it to myself. You tell a story in pieces, and sometimes the pieces refuse to stitch back together. I drove the car to the dealer the next morning. They hooked it up to a scanner, fiddled with the clock, shrugged at a possible loose wire. They tested the alternator. They ran diagnostics on the display. Nothing came back except a tiny log entry for a time sync error, which their tech couldn't explain either. He looked at me and said the one thing I hadn't wanted to hear because it meant nothing. Mechanical would fix the feeling. Electrical gremlins aren't usually anything more than bad wiring. So I'm writing this because I don't have an answer. 14 minutes showed up on the dash like someone pressed fast forward on a movie and left the film reel broken. The mirror showed a white square that filled it and then went away like a shutter closing. The only concrete is that I'm home and the world kept going. The rest sits in the place where small, unaccountable things live, under the ordinary layer of things that make sense. I started keeping my phone face up on the passenger seat after that, the way you watch a clock when you're trying to use time as an anchor. It hasn't happened again, which is maybe worse. I end up looking at the rear view sometimes when I'm stopped at traffic lights, waiting for the impossible to reappear so I can get credit for seeing it. It doesn't, and the numbers on the dash stay stubbornly normal. I've always liked night fishing. It's quiet, mostly just me, my rod, and the lake under the stars. My name's Tom Granger, and I live out near Lake Woodson, a small, pretty ordinary place in northern Wisconsin. Nothing fancy about it, just a bunch of trees, some cabins, and a lake that's usually calm and dark at night. My dog, Whiskey, a scruffy mutt with a lazy streak, usually comes with me. He's not much of a swimmer, but loves sitting on the dock and watching the water. One Friday night in early September, the air was cool, but still felt heavy, like the kind of night right before a storm rolls in. Whiskey and I headed down to the lake around 9:30 p.m., planning to fish for a few hours before calling it. The sky was clear at first, full of stars, but the wind had picked up a little, just enough to rustle the leaves and make the water's surface shimmer softly. We set up on the far end of the dock, the one that sticks out a little over the deepest part of the lake. The water there's usually still, even when it's windy, because the trees on the far shore block the worst of the gusts. I cast my line and settled in with a thermos of coffee. Whiskey curled up at my feet, eyes half closed. The night was peaceful, nothing but the occasional splash from a fish or the distant call of an owl. Then, about an hour in, I noticed something weird. At first, it was just a faint glow near the water's surface, about 30 feet from the dock. It looked like a light, but it was too dim and kind of diffuse, like someone had dropped a glow stick under the water and it was just barely visible through the dark. I leaned forward to get a better look. The glow was pale greenish white and didn't flicker or change shape. What caught me off guard was that the water around it wasn't disturbed at all. Usually, if something's floating or moving near the surface, there's some ripple or splash. This was perfectly still, like the light was just hovering there, no contact with the water at all. I figured maybe it was some kind of fish with bioluminescence or a reflection of something on the shore. I stood up and shone my flashlight toward it. The beam sliced through the dark, but the glow stayed the same, no reaction, no movement. Whiskey perked up, ears twitching, staring at the same spot. Then the light started to rise. Slowly at first, just inches above the water, then faster, moving upward like a bubble escaping from the lake bed. Except it wasn't a bubble, it was smooth, round, and glowed brighter as it rose. The water beneath it remained perfectly flat, no ripples, no waves, nothing. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, half expecting it to vanish or be some trick of the light. But it kept going, rising maybe 10 feet above the surface, then drifted horizontally, moving away from the dock and across the sky. I dropped my rod and grabbed my phone, fumbling to get the camera app open, but as soon as I focused on the glowing orb, the screen dimmed and then went black. I tried again, but it stayed that way. Dead, as if the phone was refusing to record or even see the light. Whiskey growled low, his hackles up, and I felt a chill despite the mild air. The glow kept drifting silently, smooth and steady, with no sound or disturbance at all. It moved in a slow arc, like it was following some invisible path across the stars. I followed it with my eyes, heart beating a little faster until it just disappeared. Not with a flash or a burst, just faded gently like turning off a lamp. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but after it vanished, the lake was still dead calm. No ripples, no waves, nothing to suggest anything had moved through the water or sky. I sat back down on the dock trying to process what I'd just seen. Whiskey stayed close, still tense, ears swiveling toward the trees in the lake. I kept glancing at my phone, hoping the camera would come back on, but it stayed black. The thermos was cold now, my hands shaking a little. For the rest of the night, I kept watching the sky, but nothing else showed up. No lights, no sounds, no weird reflections, just the normal quiet, the crickets, the wind in the trees, the occasional splash far off. The next morning, I told my neighbor Greg about it. He's a fisherman too, knows the lake like the back of his hand. Greg said he hadn't seen anything strange, but he didn't dismiss me. Just said, sometimes the lake has its mysteries, and that part of the world tends to mess with your head after dark. Over the next few days, I checked with a couple of other locals. A woman named Elsie mentioned seeing a faint light near the lake around the same time, but she thought it was just a flashlight or maybe some kids messing around. No one else saw anything like I did. I tried to find some explanation. Bioluminescent algae? Doesn't happen in freshwater lakes around here. Reflection from a boat? No boats were out that night. Fishing lights? None on the lake at all. No airplanes or helicopters in the area either. What stuck with me was the water, how it never moved, even though something was clearly coming up from it and floating away. The glow was there, bright and steady, but the lake didn't react like it should. Since then, I've gone back to the lake a few times, sometimes with whiskey, sometimes alone. The night I saw the light, the air was different somehow, thicker, heavier. I can't explain it. Other nights, it's just normal, calm, quiet. My phone still works fine now. No blackouts or dead screens. And whiskey? He's never liked going out on the dock after dark since that night. He stays close to shore and doesn't want to look out over the water. I don't know what that light was. I'm not sure I want to. It didn't hurt anyone, didn't say or do anything. Just showed up, drifted across the sky, and disappeared without a trace. But sometimes when the wind's right and the lake is perfectly still, I swear I catch a faint glow out there. Just under the surface, waiting. I was out walking my dog, a mutt named Pippa, on a trail behind our house in the outskirts of Asheville. It was late afternoon, early fall, and the air was crisp but not cold. The trees were just starting to turn gold and red, the kind of colors that make you think winter's close but not quite there yet. The trail is mostly quiet, except for the occasional bird or squirrel, and Pippa loves sniffing around all the fallen leaves. That day, I left my phone in my pocket because I didn't want to be distracted. I figured I'd just enjoy the walk, maybe clear my head after a long week at the bookstore where I work. Pippa was restless and tugging a little more than usual, so I let her off leash for a bit. The trail curves through a patch of dense trees, and that's when I noticed something odd. About 50 feet ahead, above the treetops, there was this large object hovering. It wasn't making any noise. No hum, no wind, nothing. It looked like a drone but way bigger, maybe 10 feet across, with a flat, oval shape. The surface was matte and dark, no blinking lights or markings. I stopped walking and stared, heart pounding a bit. I don't know much about drones, but this didn't look like any commercial or military drone I've ever seen. I reached into my pocket to get my phone and snap a picture. The second I pulled it out, the screen went black. No warning, no freeze, just dead. I tried pressing the power button, holding it down, plugging it into the portable charger I had with me. Nothing. It was like the phone had completely shut off and refused to turn back on. I looked back at the craft. It hadn't moved. It was just there, hovering, like it was watching. I felt my skin go tight, like something was crawling under it, but I shook it off and tried to focus. Maybe it was some weird weather balloon or a new kind of drone that wasn't supposed to be public yet. After a few minutes, I decided to turn around and head back toward the trailhead. I wasn't sure what to do, but I felt uneasy just standing there. Pippa was calm, which helped a little. She wagged her tail and looked up at me like she was waiting for me to make a move. As I walked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder. The object stayed put, no lights, no sounds, nothing that suggested it was about to leave. When I got close enough to the clearing where my car was parked, I tried turning my phone on again. Still nothing. I got home around 6:30, and by then the sun was setting fast. I sat down at the kitchen table and took the phone apart a bit, hoping it was just a glitch. No water damage, no cracked screen. It felt normal in my hand, but the screen wouldn't light up. I left it plugged in overnight just in case. The next morning, it still wouldn't turn on. I called my friend Leah, who's a bit of a tech whiz, and she told me to bring it over. She tried everything: hard resets, software restores, even hooking it up to her computer. Nothing. The phone was completely dead. That day, I kept thinking about the drone. I looked online for news or any reports of unusual drone sightings near Asheville. There was nothing. No police reports, no local news, no chatter on any forums. After about an hour, something weird happened. I was sitting on my couch staring at the dead phone on the coffee table when the screen suddenly flickered on by itself. It took a minute to fully boot, and when it did, it was like nothing had happened. All my apps, photos, messages, they were all there, exactly as I left them. I thought maybe it had just been a battery issue, but the timing felt too strange. The days after that, Pippa started acting jittery whenever we went near the trail. She would freeze and stare at the trees, hackles raised, low growling that I hadn't heard before. Once, she even refused to go onto the trail at all. I went back out there a couple times to see if the craft was still around, but there was no sign of it. No strange lights, no unusual sounds, just the normal forest noises. The weirdest part is that since then, my phone has had random glitches. Sometimes the camera app crashes the moment I open it. Other times the flashlight turns on by itself for no reason. Nothing that serious, but enough to keep me on edge. I don't know what I saw that day, or why my phone died the way it did. I don't even know if it was something from this world. All I know is that quiet afternoon on the trail doesn't add up, and whatever that thing was, it wasn't interested in being found, just watching. I was hiking alone, like I usually do. I prefer it that way. No distractions, just me and the trail. That morning, I left my phone off and in my pack except for the earbuds, which I had plugged into my phone earlier but then unplugged because I like to listen to the sounds around me. Still, I kept the earbuds in my ears, more out of habit than anything else. The trail was quiet, typical for midweek, early fall. The trees were just starting to change colors, and the air had that crisp, slightly damp feel you get when the sun's still low but climbing. I'd been walking for maybe an hour, nothing unusual, just the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional bird call. Then, out of nowhere, I started hearing this noise in my earbuds. It wasn't music or anything I recognized. It was faint at first, like static, but it had a rhythm, like a conversation, only it wasn't any language I knew. It was garbled, almost electronic, but distorted like an old radio picking up a weak signal. It reminded me a little of those sci-fi shows where aliens are trying to communicate, but you can't quite understand them. At first, I thought maybe it was someone playing a prank nearby, or that the earbuds had malfunctioned and were picking up some weird interference. But the weird part was, my phone was zipped away in my backpack and completely off. I double-checked before leaving. I stopped walking and pulled out the earbuds to check. They were unplugged, just dangling in my hands and totally silent once disconnected from the phone. When I put them back in, the noise came back, soft but clear enough to make my skin crawl. I figured maybe I was just tired or imagining it, so I kept walking. But the noise stayed, low, rhythmic, like voices talking back and forth. Not human voices, though. I swear it was something else. It didn't make sense, but it was definitely there. I glanced behind me, expecting to see another hiker or someone messing around, but the trail was empty. No one. Just trees and the fading light of the afternoon. The more I listened, the more unsettled I got. The sounds weren't like any language or code I'd ever heard, but they weren't random either. They felt deliberate, like something was trying to talk through the earbuds. I slowed down and looked around. The forest felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. I realized I was holding my breath without thinking about it. Then, suddenly, the noises stopped. I hadn't moved, but I glanced back the way I'd come, like something about the air shifted. It was quieter, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just silence. I turned around slowly, scanning the trees and the underbrush, but still nothing there. The only sound was my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears louder than before. I decided to take out the earbuds and put them away for real this time. As soon as I did, the forest seemed to breathe again. The birds started calling. The wind picked up just enough to shake leaves down. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I kept hiking back the way I came, sticking to the main trail. The whole time, I couldn't get the feeling off that I was being watched, like something had been following me, just out of sight. By the time I got back to my car, it was dark enough that the parking lot lights flickered on. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls, no strange signals or anything. I don't know what that noise was or why it came through my unplugged earbuds. I'm not the kind to freak out over stuff like this, but that day felt different. Like something was there, just beyond the edge of what I could see or hear, trying to make contact without really showing itself. I'm not sure I want to go back to that trail alone again, so... I didn't really believe in anything strange before all this happened. I mean, I've always liked looking up at the night sky, stars, planets, satellites, but I never thought I'd end up with footage that I couldn't explain. It started a couple months ago, during one of those clear, cold October nights here in northern Maine. I'm a photographer, mostly landscape and nature stuff, and I got into night sky time-lapse photography last year. I'd set up my camera in the backyard of my place in Eastport, a small town right on the coast. The air was crisp, a little damp from the ocean fog that had rolled out earlier, and I was hoping to catch some good shots of the Milky Way, or maybe the Northern Lights if I was lucky. That night, I set the camera on the tripod in the side yard, pointed it up at the sky just past the tree line, and programmed it to take a photo every 10 seconds for about 4 hours. I figured I'd check the footage the next morning. The next day, I downloaded the images and started stitching them into a time-lapse video. I was scrolling through, watching the stars slowly move across the sky, the clouds drifting by now and then, when I noticed something odd. There was this shape, sort of oval, kind of like a balloon or a blimp, right in the middle of the frame. It was dark at first, almost blending into the sky, but then it slowly started rotating. Not the stars or the planets, just this shape. It moved too, but very subtly, almost like it was hovering. At first I thought it was a drone, or maybe some kind of weather balloon caught in the frame. But then the colors started to change. The shape shifted from a deep blue to an eerie green, then a dull orange, cycling slowly. None of the stars did anything like that. Planets don't just glow in changing colors, and there wasn't a plane or helicopter light pattern. I went outside right away to see if I could spot anything with my own eyes, but the sky was clear, and I didn't see anything unusual. No lights, no shape, nothing. I showed the footage to my friend Lena. She's a wildlife biologist and knows a bit about drones and all that tech. She said, could be some kind of weird camera artifact or light reflection. I wanted to believe her, but the more I looked at the footage, the less sense it made. The next night, I set the camera up again, same spot, same time interval. I stayed out there longer, just watching the sky. The air smelled of salt and pine. Luna, my dog, a lean little border collie mix with sharp eyes, was restless, sniffing the ground and staring at the tree line. Around midnight, the wind picked up, and there was that low hum you sometimes get from distant power lines or a passing plane. But Luna stopped and growled low, staring toward the water. I looked that way too, but saw nothing. The camera caught the same shape again, this time a little higher in the sky, rotating, glowing faintly. The colors were more muted, pastel-like. When I reviewed the footage that morning, I noticed something else weird. The shape's rotation didn't seem consistent. Sometimes it spun clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise, but the stars were all steady and slow, drifting eastward like normal. The shape's movement didn't match any natural pattern. I started checking the local weather radar and flight paths for drones or aircraft, but nothing matched the time or location. Over the next week, it kept happening. Every night, the shape appeared somewhere in the frame, rotating and cycling colors. Sometimes it got close to the horizon, other times it was almost at the zenith. Luna never seemed relaxed during these nights. She'd follow me around, her ears twitching, alert to sounds I couldn't hear. One night, I decided to try and get a better look. I brought out my binoculars and set up a second camera with a zoom lens. I sat in the yard, Luna curled up next to me, fog rolling off the nearby harbor. The shape appeared around 11:45 p.m., just as the air got colder. I focused the binoculars on it, but it was oddly blurry, like looking at it through a heat haze or a dirty window. Then the colors started cycling again, deep green to blue to a dull amber. But there was something else, a faint pulsating glow, almost like it was breathing. I blinked and looked away, then back, and it had shifted slightly in position. No sudden jumps, just slow movement. I tried to catch it on the zoom camera, but the image kept distorting and pixelating strangely around the edges of the shape, almost like interference. I got the feeling it was watching me as much as I was watching it. After about half an hour, it drifted slowly upward and faded from view. The street lamps buzzed faintly, and Luna whimpered softly. The next day, I compared the timestamps from the cameras. The zoom lens camera had several minutes of missing footage, just black frames with static sound. The Maine time-lapse camera was fine. I kept replaying the footage, trying to see if maybe I missed something. A person, a drone, a balloon. Nothing. The shape didn't cast a shadow on the clouds or reflect light like anything I'd ever seen. Some nights, when the sky was overcast, the shape was absent. But I swear sometimes I could feel a presence nearby, like the air thickened and a low vibration thrummed through the ground. One evening, after a late shift at the diner, I stopped by the side yard to check the camera. It was a clear, cold night, and the stars were brilliant. Luna sat quietly beside me, tail flicking. I noticed the battery pack for the camera was warm, even though it hadn't been charging. That didn't make sense. The shape appeared again, low on the horizon, rotating slower than usual. This time, it wasn't just the color cycling. The shape's surface seemed to ripple, like waves on water. The light from it cast an odd glow on the nearest pine trees, but nothing else. I moved closer, trying not to spook Luna. As I watched, I saw a small part of the shape flicker and become transparent for a second, almost like it wasn't fully there. I snapped a photo with my phone. The camera lens focused on the sky, but when I checked the photo, the shape was gone, just empty blackness where it should have been. I put my phone down, feeling a tight knot in my chest. The next morning, I was exhausted. My dreams were strange, fragmented images of light and color, cold wind on my face, and Luna barking at shadows. The weirdness kept building. Sometimes the streetlights would flicker when the shape appeared in the sky. Sometimes my phone would lose signal or randomly reboot. One night, I set up a motion sensor by the back door. Luna was nervous, pacing inside the house. At about 2:30 a.m., the sensor picked something up, just a soft movement near the bushes. When I looked outside, nothing was there. The next morning, the motion sensor was off, the batteries dead. That same day, I checked the time-lapse footage from the previous night. The shape showed up briefly, but halfway through the clip, the entire sky went black for about 15 seconds, then returned to normal. The stars were frozen in place. I rubbed my eyes and stared for a long time. I couldn't explain any of it. My neighbors hadn't noticed anything. No reports on the news. Just me and Luna watching the sky, feeling the nights grow heavier, the silence louder. Sometimes I wonder if I was imagining it, if the long hours staring up and the loneliness of the cold nights were playing tricks on me. But then I see the footage again, the slow rotation, the color shifts, the strange rippling, and Luna won't stop watching the horizon, ears pricked, like she's waiting for something to come back. So here I am, still pointing the camera up, waiting for the shape to appear, hoping to catch something that makes sense. But for now, all I have are questions, a restless dog, and a sky that keeps hiding secrets I can't quite reach. The first time it happened, I thought my radio was just acting up. It was an old Zenith I'd picked up at a garage sale years ago, a big box with a wooden frame and a dial that still smelled faintly like cigarette smoke. I'd been tinkering with radios for decades. Retired now, but it was a hobby I kept alive, something to occupy my hands and mind after I left the engineering firm. Anyway, it was late, about 11:47 p.m., though I only knew because I always checked the clock at that time. The radio was set to a local AM station, static humming softly in the background. Suddenly, from the speaker came three clear, simple tones in a sequence. Beep, 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 and then nothing else. The static returned, and the dial didn't move. I figured it was some interference, or maybe a nearby transmitter glitch. But that night, curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed a notebook and jotted down the time and what I'd heard. The next night, exactly the same thing happened at 11:47 p.m. Same three tones, same timing. I thought maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe my old radio was picking up some kind of automated message from a local station. But the nights rolled on, and every night at 11:47, the radio would buzz those three tones. I started logging it. Date, time, weather, anything that seemed relevant, but the pattern never changed. No variation, no added sounds, no voice, no background noise, just the same three tones. What really got to me was that it never happened at any other time. If I turned the radio off or changed the station, the tones didn't come. I had to have it on that exact frequency, and it had to be exactly 11:47 p.m. I set up a timer to make sure I was always awake for it. If I drifted off a little early or late, the tones wouldn't come. It was like some sort of clock that only ticked at one moment, once every 24 hours. The local AM station I tuned to was just a regular talk radio. Nothing special. I called them once, asked if they were broadcasting anything like that, but the technician laughed it off and said it must be interference or some kind of prank. I started testing other radios, my old transistor, a newer digital set, even a shortwave receiver, but none picked up the tones like my Zenith did. That old radio was special in this way. The others just had static. Months passed, and I was getting weird looks from my family because I was waking up in the middle of the night to scribble notes about some damn beeps. I didn't care. It felt important in a way I couldn't explain. One night after the tones finished, I waited. I thought maybe the signal would do something else, maybe repeat or change, but nothing. Just silence. Then I heard something else, very faint, like a whisper on the edge of hearing. I strained to listen but couldn't make it out clearly. It didn't sound like radio static, more like a soft hum or maybe wind blowing through a distant tunnel. I checked the frequency again, still on the same station, still the same spot on the dial. After that, I got a little obsessed. I started recording the transmissions with an old cassette recorder, capturing the exact moment of the tones. When I played it back, the tones were pure, steady, and clear, but that faint whisper wasn't there. It was like it only existed live, impossible to capture. I even tried to map the signal, triangulate where it might be coming from, but there was no pattern, no clear direction. My house was in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. No known transmitters around except the local AM and a few police radio towers miles away. One evening, I was out on the porch, waiting for 11:47. The night was clear, dry, the kind of stillness that presses in on you. At exactly the time, the three tones came through the radio, steady and sharp. Then I noticed a light, not bright, more like a flicker off in the distance, maybe a couple of miles away. It wasn't a car or a street lamp. It was higher up like a hovering glow, soft blue-green. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was a plane or a helicopter, but nothing flew over our neighborhood that late without noise. And the light was steady before it vanished. No blinking or moving, just there and then not. After that, the feeling that I wasn't alone in this little mystery stayed with me. It wasn't fear exactly, more like an itch under my skin, like something was waiting for me to figure it out. Some nights, when the tones came through, the static would shift, and I'd think I heard faint patterns, maybe Morse code, but nothing consistent. Just noises I could never quite pin down. My wife asked if I wanted to move the radio to another room, but I refused. That old Zenith was the only one that worked. It was almost like it was built for this. I even looked up the model number and date. made in 1953, back when radios were all tubes and dials. One morning, I woke up early and found my notes scattered on the floor near the radio. I didn't remember knocking them over, but maybe I did sleepwalk. When I picked them up, I saw a strange thing. The times for the tones weren't always exactly 11:47 anymore. Some nights, the logging showed 11:46 or 11:48. I was sure I'd been careful, but the notes didn't lie. That made me question everything. Was I just imagining the exact time? Was my internal clock off? Then I checked the radio again. It was still tuned to the same frequency. The tones came through sharp and clear as always. That same night, the faint whisper returned after the tones, clearer this time. It was like a voice trying to form words, but failing. A kind of broken murmur I could almost understand, but never quite. I didn't record it. I thought maybe if I tried, it would disappear again like before. Over the next weeks, I felt the strange presence more. Sometimes when the tones played, I'd get the feeling of being watched from somewhere far away, like a pair of eyes tracking me through the static. One night, I left the radio on all day, waiting for 11:47 to roll around again. But the tones never came. I checked the radio the next night and found it had switched stations on its own, static filling the speaker. I set it back, and the next night the tones returned. I started thinking maybe the radio itself was acting like a kind of receiver, catching signals from somewhere I couldn't reach, or maybe somewhere else was reaching out to me. There was no logic to it, no patterns, no answers. I've tried explaining it to friends, but they just laugh or change the subject. Even my son thinks I'm wasting my time. But I keep the radio on, tuned to that frequency, and every night I wait for the three tones at 11:47 p.m. Sometimes I think I'm hearing things, or maybe I'm losing it, but the watch by the bedside says it's almost time again. The night I was driving home from work, something happened that I still can't really explain. I was coming back from my usual night shift at the hospital in Spokane. It was late, almost 2 a.m., and the roads were mostly empty. The sky was clear, cold, the kind of early spring night where the air feels sharp, but still holds a little warmth from the day. I had my windows cracked just a bit to keep the car from feeling too stuffy, and the only thing filling the silence besides the engine was the faint hum of the radio, tuned low. About 20 minutes into the drive, somewhere out past the last stretch of streetlights before the highway gave way to the open fields, I saw it. A light in the sky, moving downwards slowly. At first, I thought it was a falling star, like the kind you see during meteor showers. But this one didn't fall the way a star usually does. It wasn't rushing or streaking across the sky. It just descended straight down, almost floating. I blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was seeing things, or maybe the city lights were messing with my eyes. But it was there, just hovering midair, maybe a few hundred feet above the ground. It didn't make a sound, not even the faintest buzz or crackle you'd expect from something moving through the atmosphere. I mean, it was dead silent. I slowed the car a little, watching it as it hung in place. The light wasn't bright like a spotlight or a street lamp. It was more like a soft glow, maybe yellowish or amber, but steady. It didn't flicker or move around much. I tried to see if I could figure out its shape, but it was too far away, just a bright blur. Then, just as slowly as it came down, it suddenly shot straight back up into the sky. Faster than anything I'd seen before, like a bullet, but again, without a sound. It disappeared into the dark night above the trees. I kept driving, but my heart was pounding. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with this strange kind of tension. I looked in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights behind me, maybe someone else who saw the same thing, but the road was empty. When I got home, I told my roommate Sarah about it. She laughed and said it was probably just a satellite or a drone. But I know what I saw. Drones don't move like that, especially not that high or that quietly. The next few nights, I kept glancing up while driving, hoping to catch it again or see something similar. Nothing. The sky was normal, the stars were normal, and traffic was just as sparse as usual. But that night, for some reason, everything felt different. I noticed other small things that didn't quite add up in the following days. My phone started glitching out. calls dropped, the screen flickered randomly. My clock radio reset itself several times, always around 2 a.m. Even the lights in my apartment would dim briefly, like a quick power fluctuation, but the building's main power never went out. I tried to shrug it off at first. I'm not one to get spooked easily, but the more I thought about that light, the more uneasy I felt. The way it moved, the silence. There was no obvious explanation. No planes nearby, no satellites showing up on any of the tracking apps I checked. Just that slow fall, the hover, then the sudden climb back up. I thought maybe I was tired, overworked, just imagining things after a long shift. But the moment stuck with me. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night now,